Welcome once again to a special bonus episode of Cinemaholics. We are doing a Star Wars ranking holiday special of our own. I am John Negroni, as always, from the main show, and with me I, of course, have Cinemaholics contributor and the one who will bring balance to this ranking, Sam Noland.
That is I, yes. I hope to bring balance to something, by God, because it's that time of the year. It's the holiday season. Everything's going to hell just before it all turns into heaven again. So I'm excited to be here talking about a galaxy far, far away.
That's right. And the way that Sam and I are going to be spending Life Day, of course, is by going through the films, the Star Wars films, most of them, if not all of them, and mostly the ones that were released in theaters. And similar to what we did with the Marvel films when Avengers Endgame came out, we are going to be coming up with our own master ranking of these films. But we're going to do something slightly different. At Sam's suggestion, we're going to start by just going through our list and then doing the ranking at the very end.
Yes.
And you have 2 extra movies on your list that I don't have. So you have 15. You have a top 15. I have a top 13. Because I did not include a couple of animated films that we'll get into, mainly because I don't remember them very well, so I didn't want to include them. So I just have 13.
Fair enough.
That should suffice. So it'll be a little tricky the first couple. Like, what's your number 15? Nothing. NA. Not applicable.
Not at all, yeah. So I'll have to remember that things are staggered slightly. So I'm going to be keeping track of both of our lists here. And then at the end, we're going to sort of average it all out if indeed we mathematically can. And what will result is what I hope to be a beautiful representation of Cinemaholics Star Wars list, official.
Right. Now, the problem, of course, is that math and science, come on, they're not 2 concepts that easily apply to Star Wars.
No, not really.
I agree with you in spirit. This will be a fun way for us to come to some sort of reckoning for the Star Wars movies, as Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker has been in theaters for about a week, and a lot of people have seen it at this point, and I think it's fair for us to sort of look back on the Skywalker saga and etc.
Yeah,
and then
beyond.
some, and try to compartmentalize some of these films, especially in the wake of the more recent Disney-fied Star Wars films ever since that acquisition from the early 2010s. Kind of a wrap up on this decade in Star Wars as well. Interesting.
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, it's Star Wars is a different thing now than it was 5 years ago. So there's certainly going to be an element to this episode that might be kind of off-putting, just given sort of the nature around Star Wars. I remember I not the exact episode, but sometime on Anyway, That's All I Got, my own spin-off podcast that I had last year, at one point I expressed a sentiment that was essentially Star Wars isn't fun anymore. And it's not that the movies aren't fun necessarily. It's now kind of associated with this really like frustrating conversation around it that is just completely black and white, and it's hard to see other points of view. So I hope that this will not stoke that dangerous, toxic flame any more than it has to.
Well, Sam, from my point of view, the fandom is evil.
I see what you did there, John. Yes.
So here's how it's going to work. We're going to start at the bottom of our respective lists, and we'll do our best to put aside. I really don't want to get into culture wars or any of that stuff. I don't really care, at least not right now. I want to talk about these movies, and I want to have some insightful conversation about their place in the greater Star Wars canon. So let's begin at number 15. Sam, what's your number 15? What's on your list?
As we stand right now, number 15, which by my list is dead last, is the one, the only, the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Yeah, see, that's at the bottom of my list. It's the worst one. How could anybody argue differently? Like, what is even that argument?
You know, well, I've heard arguments, not the least of which are from our own Will Ashton, who is not with us at the moment. The thing with the Star Wars Holiday Special is that it is such a joke at this point that it's easy to forget just how miserable it is to watch. And if for whatever reason you don't know what the Star Wars Holiday Special is that basically Star Wars comes out 1977. It was November, I want to say, if memory serves, and it was such a huge hit. Obviously, still is. It took the world completely by storm almost immediately, and so naturally they said, "Let's do a sequel." And so George Lucas, in an effort to quote keep Star Wars alive in the minds of fans, as if they needed that, decided, let's do a made-for-TV special with just a bunch of random stuff that we can come up with, and let's just throw it all together in the vein of one of the variety shows that was popular at the time, which is basically just a series of like little sketches and anecdotes and clips and stuff, and let's just put it out there and just let that be that. And so as a result, no one had any passion for it whatsoever. And if you watch it now, which you can, despite George Lucas's best efforts, you can tell no one wants to be there whatsoever. And it's true. You read all the interviews, no one wants to acknowledge it, no one wants to talk about it. Only Carrie Fisher, God bless her, will even talk for longer than 30 seconds about this, said that she owned a copy given to her by George Lucas and would put it on at house parties when she wanted people to leave. So that tells you just about everything you need to know. Yeah. Did you know that, John?
I mean, I understand her dilemma, because who wants to leave Carrie Fisher's house? She has to bring out the big guns.
I do not envy that person.
Rest in peace, Carrie Fisher. We miss you. Yeah, the holiday special, no, it's not good. It's boring. And it's just plain weird. It has no place in the Star Wars canon. But you're right that Will Ashton, he sent me his list. And I wanted to avoid bringing this up as long as possible. But he has it at number 11.
Number 11 out of what?
Out of 13, like me.
Out of 13.
So he did the same thing I did. So he has it above 2 other films.
Huh.
I will mention them when we get to them. But
yes,
all right, that's the holiday special. Yikes.
That's the holiday special. Yeah. And listen, I do want to address this argument that Will makes, which is essentially that it is so ludicrous that it sort of becomes fascinating to watch.
Which
and on one hand, I
can
kind of understand that, because there is so much weird stuff in this. I don't even want to call it a movie. It's just a collection of stuff that happens that vaguely resembles this big space opera that had come out the year before, thinly strung together by an interminably boring story on what we would later know as Kashyyyk, the Wookiee homeworld, where Chewbacca's family is just sort of waiting around for Chewbacca to show up so they can celebrate basically the Wookiee equivalent of like Thanksgiving or Christmas or something.
It's Christmas because it's the holiday special. So
it's the holiday special, but they never specify what holiday it is. It's Life Day.
Well, it's Life. I think Life Day is supposed to be kind of a tie-in for Christmas,
more or less, and it did air around Christmas, so it's not an unfair conclusion to draw. But yeah, it's not like overtly connected to like Christmas traditions and stuff. Like there's no equivalent to Santa Claus. There's no Christmas tree. It's just sort of this vague idea of celebrating life, which is easy enough to get behind, but that is so not what this movie is about. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Which is why I push back on Will with this, because I see the 2 films he put this above, and I won't reveal what they are yet, but those films, for all of their problems and for all of their faults, one in particular, both of them have ideas. Both of them have rewatchability factors. I look at the holiday special and I think it's a waste of people's time. I can see people maybe watching it once out of curiosity, but there's no meaning to it. There's no importance to it. There's nothing grandiose, or even there's no effort that's really visible. So that to me is like, nah, I can't get on board. But
that's the biggest thing.
I respect Will Ashton's opinion. I do owe him a life debt.
Wants to be so ridiculous that it's fascinating, but there's not even any passion put into it. And so I'm not, it feels like I'm letting them win if I'm fascinated by the movie, that they just so didn't care about this. And if I somehow get something out of it, then they actually won in the end. And I refuse to let that happen. So yeah, it's dead last.
So holiday special, dead last for both you and me.
I think we can lock that in safely.
Sam, what's your number 14?
My number 14 is another strange one that is not often included in Star Wars rankings, just for the simple fact that it's not part of the quote Skywalker saga or any of the more high profile spin-offs. But besides the holiday special, which was just more of a perfunctory continuation than anything, the first proper spin-off of Star Wars was released after Return of the Jedi, 1 year after, in fact, 1984. There were two television movies released theatrically overseas centering on Ewoks, the creatures that debuted on the forest moon of Endor in Return of the Jedi. The first of which is called Caravan of Courage, an Ewok adventure, which is my number 14.
Caravan of Courage. So this is the
That's
first
the
one. And can you watch them or are you supposed to watch them chronologically, or are they just sort of episodic?
They're very removed from the events of Return of the Jedi. As a matter of fact, I think they take place before, in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi is when they canonically, if that can even be used appropriately here, that's when they're supposed to take place. But it really does not matter at all. There are a few common characters, such as some of the more famous Ewoks, Wicket, for example, also played by Warwick Davis on him. So good on him. And it centers on this human family that crash lands on the forest moon of Endor during like a space vacation, more or less. And the parents are captured, and the kids, a boy and a girl, Mace and Sindel, you heard that right, Mace. So Samuel L. Jackson, not the first Mace in Star Wars, which
Believe it or not.
It's very strange. And the thing about the two Ewok movies, the other one I'll get to later, but Caravan of Courage is just nothing. Like I'm struggling to remember anything about it. I remember that the ship crash lands. They're hostile towards the Ewoks initially, but then they start like giving them weapons and stuff, and they start bonding, and eventually they reconnect with the parents and everything. It's a dumb kids movie that will keep them entertained for what feels like 4 hours, but is probably only like 90 minutes or something. And it just amounts to nothing. And it's just so hard to watch. And they can be watched if you are that curious. There is a semi-respectable DVD, which is a double feature, and they couldn't even afford to put 2 discs in. Like, it's one DVD that is double-sided, which I didn't even know was possible. They have Caravan of Courage on one, and the second one, and Ewoks, The Battle for Endor, on the other side. So that threw me for a loop, but I did spend the money. I coughed up $4. I got that, and actually got it for last year to talk about it on anyway. That's all I got. So I just happen to still have it, and I'm like, why not? I'll give it a rewatch. And sure enough, it was just as lame and nothing as I remember. So yeah, there's a reason these have been forgotten, even though I argue they should be in the conversation.
I definitely have not seen Caravan of Courage, but I do know I've seen the second one, or at least parts of it. I do remember watching the animated Ewok movies. Those ones, whew, those are weird. Watching those on like VHS. Strange. Caravan of Courage doesn't sound, since it's so low on the list, doesn't sound like I should be seeking that one out. And since I don't have it on my list, I am leaving it out. So that's your number 14. I don't have a number 14. So let's go to number 13.
Number 13 is the animated Star Wars The Clone Wars movie released in 2008.
That's my number 11.
Okay.
So I have it higher than one other film that you have not mentioned yet.
Yes.
Okay, so 2008, this movie comes out. I saw it in a theater, did you?
As did I, yes. I was 9 years old. Think about that.
What were you thinking? What was your mindset with Star Wars at this point?
You know, it was, as far as my memory goes, I had, my parents had the 6 episodic movies on DVD. I remember watching them all the time, both the prequels and the original trilogy. And so naturally, when a new Star Wars thing came out, like Revenge of the Sith was only 2005, but it seemed like an eternity ago in my world, which was 3 years, which was like a third of my life. So it felt as if Star Wars had been gone forever and was finally coming back. And I remember seeing trailers for this as I was watching TV and stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's going to be set between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and it's going to be like a feature-length pilot for this new Clone Wars TV series, and that's what it was. It was sort of the jumping off point.
Disney sort of did that sort of thing, where they would have a sequel to a movie, but would really be a stealth pilot for a TV show that they were about to air.
Interesting. Yeah, that was before they were piggybacking on Disney tradition before it was ever in good taste to do so.
The weird thing, yeah, it was before they were Disney, right? But the weird thing about it too is that there already was a Clone Wars miniseries. It was
That's
a
right.
totally different animation style. I know you were talking about maybe including them as sort of like an anthology. I fought you
Yeah.
on it because I don't think it wasn't intended to be a movie, so I had an issue with including that one. But I think that the miniseries before this movie thing was really good. Hand-drawn
It's
animated.
fantastic.
Gendy Tartakovsky.
Yes.
The latter half of it is phenomenal. It really like fills in the gaps. I said gaps correctly. I almost thought I was supposed to say gasps because I was thinking of General Grievous who gasps so much. But no, it bridges the gaps so well. Not just between the second movie and the third movie, but the first part of the miniseries, and then like what happens right before Revenge of the Sith, and it's such a great accompaniment. And I almost resented this animated thing that was hitting theaters. I felt like, why are we doing this? I thought that it was over, and I didn't like the animation style. I still don't. I know that
it's not great.
People still really like this and like Rebels and like that whole aesthetic. I've never liked it, even though I've heard the stories are phenomenal.
Yeah, this sort of weird 3D models with like big expressive like anime eyes and stuff.
I'm just not into it. I like the hand-drawn versions infinitely more, but I know it's probably a much harder thing to create. The movie itself, extremely forgettable.
It's completely forgettable. Yeah. Basically what happens is that it's not long after Attack of the Clones ends. The Clone Wars have begun, and so it's sort of the Republic and the Separatists fighting for like the favor of the Intergalactic Commission of Yakety Yak or whatever. It's a whole bunch of stuff going on. But the meat of the story is that Jabba the Hutt's son, just let that sink in for a second. Jabba the Hutt's son is kidnapped.
Jabba gets around, man.
Jabba
family program.
Jabba has apparently fathered a child in the form of this horrendous looking little slug kind of thing named Rada the Hutt that sort of slithers around. It's been kidnapped, and the Jedi's idea is to recover Jabba's stolen son, return him to Jabba so that they'll get Jabba's favor. And so they'll have at least someone on their side for this ongoing war. What they don't know is that it was actually the evil Sith Lord Count Dooku all along who had captured Rada the Huttlet, and thus lots of perfunctory action ensues and lots of really bad humor that would just not get too much better from what I remember, although I remember digging the show quite a bit. It's if you haven't seen the show that this eventually spun off into, it gets better than this. I assure you.
I've seen most of the first season, and I think by the time I finished, I was really just I was in a weird place where I was just getting into college, and it just wasn't for me anymore. You know, animated shows. Like I tried, I was just barely too old for it, and I like stuff like a little bit longer than I probably should have, as you know, when I like things like SpongeBob and crazy stuff. It was the end of an era for me, right? It was like Avatar: The Last Airbender had just ended in 2008, and I was ready to sort of move on, and I remember watching it and just sort of being like, this is fine. I don't think there's anything clearly wrong with it. It just doesn't leave an impression on me, and there's nothing about it that stands out. So I have it pretty close to the bottom of my list at number 11. There is a film that I do think is worse. Like it just actively is bad. It's like the one Star Wars film besides the special that I think is just plain bad in a disappointing way. Like we actually had expectations that it just dashed, and we'll get to that. But Will has Clone Wars, believe it or not, as number 9.
You're kidding me.
Number 9. He puts it above 4 other Star Wars films.
Including, one of them, as we know, the holiday special.
The holiday special, yes.
My goodness.
Like us, but yeah.
William, you're an interesting man. I will say that much.
He is a rebel. Rebel scum. What is your number 12?
My number 12, rounding out sort of the Misfit saga, as I sort of like to affectionately refer to it as, is the last of the quote movies that don't count by most standards, which is, as I mentioned before, the other Ewok movie, Ewoks: The Battle for Endor. This is the one that has the Alien 3 beginning, where we cut to Endor after the happy ending of the first one, where, you know, everyone's reunited and the Ewoks and humans are living peacefully. And then the entire human family, except the little girl, gets slaughtered viciously. And it's just the Ewoks, Sindel, the little girl, and weirdly enough, Wilford Brimley just fighting off these like evil sorcerers and wizards and stuff. And it really leans into the fantasy with this one. It's still 90% of it is still insufferable to watch, but with this one I can at least, and I use that term very deliberately, I can at least admire that they just sort of tried to make something a little entertaining with this one. Like, I can see this being enjoyable as like some sort of a strange, like almost He-Man kind of thing. Like, the villains are very just high fantasy. They don't have a lot of personality, but they have an interesting look. And there's all the archetypes and stuff. So this one I can sort of get through in a way that I can't really get through Caravan of Courage and remain intact on the other side. But make no mistake, it is still just not worth your time unless you're a mega completionist like I am.
I only sort of remember this movie, and to the point where I didn't want to include it because I don't think I could effectively rank it. You put it over Clone Wars. Why is that?
I feel like there is a little bit more conviction to this one. The thing with the Clone Wars 2008 movie is that you watch it now knowing in context that it's like sort of a functional pilot for this TV series they were going to spin out into. It's very apparent that they're just throwing in as much stuff as they can without any rhyme or reason, just as a way to sort of advertise, hey, this is what you can expect a little bit later on. Like, there's this whole, not even subplot, it's just kind of a little thing that happens where Asajj Ventress, one of the main antagonists of the TV series, an evil Sith Lord, apprentice of Count Dooku, fights Obi-Wan, and they have like this weird sexual tension, and it's like, and that's just kind of the end of it. It happens for one scene, and it doesn't really add anything to the movie. It grinds it to a halt, in fact, but it's clearly just there to be an advertisement. There's stuff like that all over the movie. Ewoks: The Battle for Endor, I'm like, I can give them like a little golf clap for saying, listen, you did what you set out to do, more or less. I don't think it was good, but I can at least give them that. So it's very close. Obviously, they're right next to each other, but with that one, I can at least give it a little more. Caravan of Courage is so nothing that I can't forgive it as much. But that's kind of where I stand on that.
It's funny. I totally forgot like there was like a thing with Ventress and Obi-Wan to the point where I think maybe people should give a little credit where it's due to Reylo. Where'd they get their inspiration? I don't know. Maybe think about that.
You might be onto something there, yeah.
So that is Ewoks: The Battle for Endor as your number 12.
That's correct.
My number 12 is Attack of the Clones.
I thought it might be this one, yeah.
I think this is, aside from the special, just flat out worst of the theatrical Star Wars movies. I rewatched it just yesterday, and it continues to be the hardest Star Wars film for me to get through.
Yes, that's the thing.
It really
is. It's hard to watch.
The
like,
pacing
literally
is atrocious. Like it the way that it opens, especially you notice it very distinctly when you binge these movies and you see like they move at such a good clip, like such a good speed. Revenge of the Sith zaps you right into the middle of this like really exciting set piece, mimicking the escape rescue of the Tatooine scene in Return of the Jedi. With Attack of the Clones, it begins with an assassination attempt and some exposition on like catching up on these characters after 10 years. And it's a lot. The worst thing about this movie is these visual effects are Star Wars at its worst.
You think it's worse than Phantom Menace?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Phantom Menace has craft to it. I think there is some awkward CGI in Phantom Menace, no question. Especially in like later years when they added even more stuff like the CGI Yoda. Yeah. But Attack of the Clones is like endless. It's the first time you feel like all of these sets are CGI and green screen.
Hmm.
It's so distracting. Like there's entire CGI characters. Like there's like the banking character on Geonosis who makes
Ah, yes.
Jar Jar look like one of the Na'vi from Avatar. It really is insane.
You're talking about the one with like the big tall white head or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's so like Obi-Wan just like walks into that diner and
Yeah,
everything about it
Dexter
is just
does not
so
look great.
odd.
The big monsters in like the Colosseum scene are
Oh,
like it's so easy to tell that they're just not there. Yeah, I guess for whatever reason, in my mind, Attack of the Clones and Phantom Menace were sort of on a level playing field. But now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, that they did go a little bit more overboard. I think it might be that the technology got better and they were able to do more, or maybe that they just got cocky for whatever reason. They thought, all right, well, we sort of got away with it one time. Let's just go all out. And it really does feel like one of those all or nothing movies where just like so much is thrown into it and I don't even know what it's trying to accomplish by the end. Like it really doesn't. I'm gonna make this point later with Revenge of the Sith, but Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, to me, besides a few key like character developments, don't really need to exist. Like I really have trouble understanding how that got us to a place that we couldn't have just gotten to with a few bits of exposition in an opening crawl for something like Revenge of the Sith. So yeah, I have Attack of the Clones a decent bit higher. I still have fun with some of the more broad adventure scenes. Like as bad as the effects are and as silly as the whole thing is, all the action stuff on Geonosis, I can at least get through. I'm like, okay, whatever. This is Star Wars action nonsense. Maybe it's just a nostalgia thing. So who knows? But yeah, I don't take as much issue as you, and I know for sure Will does with this one, but it is certainly one of the lesser ones.
what was your number for it though?
Oh yeah, it's I have it at number 8, so a little bit higher.
Man, that feels far. Will has it as his number 13. That's
Dead last.
his worst.
Interesting.
And yeah, it's just I could go on and on and on. There's
Yeah.
so much about it that I hate. I hate
Yeah.
this movie. I just think it's bad. And I really think like even the action scenes, obviously, 11-year-old Jonathan, when he was in the theater with a couple of his buddies watching Attack of the Clones, I was so into it. I really was. I wanted to be Anakin Skywalker. You know, I liked how dark and edgy that storyline was. I kind of disagree about like the usefulness of Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. I
Okay.
think like the point of them is they do sort of set up, as prequels theoretically should do, this universe and how did we get to where we are in Revenge of the Sith. I think one of the things that both of those movies do really well, and Revenge of the Sith, is they really get you to understand why the Jedi are terrible
Yeah.
and how they were able to like lose all of their power in their hubris and arrogance and show the hypocrisy of the Jedi, that they could be so easily played into their own destruction. That's what really works. I think the whole twist of like how the Empire comes to be is really effective, and you need
It is.
Attack of the Clones to make sense out of that. The big downside is that all three of the movies rely so much on intertextuality. John, what's intertextuality? I'll tell you. It's the idea that things are only meaningful or important to the plot because they're a reference to something you already know. So the only reason Chewbacca showing up in Revenge of the Sith or C-3PO not having his gold armor plating yet and being played for jokes, the only reason that is important or adds anything or is there is because you remember C-3PO from the original trilogy. And it's a dangerous sandpit of a trap because prequels, in a sense, are kind of supposed to do that by nature. It's just how do you balance that? And I think Attack of the Clones does the worst job at this because everything that it's doing to sort of put in little sprinkles, like down to like the Death Star designs showing up at the end of that movie.
Show up for 1 second just to be like, hey, remember this? This is going to be a thing later.
It's such fan service in like the nth degree. There are a couple things that kind of work. I think the idea behind Boba Fett is interesting and like where he comes from.
Yeah.
Kind of a neat addition. My only problem is that they really just the whole plot of like Jango Fett going from Camino to Geonosis and then nobody questioning why the guy who helped create this clone army is helping the Separatists. and the Jedi just sort of go along. That's what I mean. Like they're
Yeah.
stupid. Like they're just so dumb. Like how do they
There
not
has to have been
see?
a scene where Yoda went to Kamino,
Yeah.
like, here to pick up the clone army, I am, and like just sort of went along with it, and then they had one fight, and there was like not even any working it out. Like,
Yeah.
did the clones have to sign a release or something? Like, it's all
Yeah.
so much strange stuff, and that is the thing that bothers me the most. I think that tying Boba Fett in a strange way to like the stormtrooper army that we knew from the original trilogy, I really didn't think they had to do that. And also just the whole connection with C-3PO to Darth Vader, I thought that was a little too close-minded, and I still do. It's very frustrating.
There's also a bit of a plot hole there because there's this idea presented that C-3PO lived with Owen Lars and Beru and all of them for years. But then in New Hope, they act like they don't know who this droid is. Like, how would they have forgotten? Like, the only difference is that his plating is gold. Now, true, C-3PO wouldn't remember them because his mind was wiped at the end of Revenge of the Sith. But still.
Yeah. And not to mention that R2's wasn't. So that means R2 knows who Darth Vader is and never tells Luke. What the hell, R2? Well, come on.
R2, he's just being a bro, you know. He doesn't want to tell his buddy. Doesn't want him to
but
sad.
That's if you knew who my father was and I didn't, and I was about to fight to the death with that person, I'd want you to say something. I'm sorry. I don't care if you're a robot or whatever, or if you're, just trying to play it cool. That's some important stuff.
Maybe he was told not to. We don't know.
We don't know, and that's the problem. That's kind of the big thing that we're running into here, is that they didn't. I don't want to accuse them of like not thinking it through, but a lot of it does seem to operate on fan service. So yeah, Attack of the Clones is the worst of the prequels, certainly. But I hold it in a little bit higher regard. I will stand by the fight scene between Obi-Wan and Jango Fett, both on land, on Kamino, and in space. I also love the design of Kamino. It's a strange thing to latch onto, but it is such an imaginative design for a planet, regardless of how good the visual effects are. I've always been fascinated just by the different environments of the planets of Star Wars, and Kamino is one of my favorites. So just being there alone is enough to get my mind whirring. So I can't deny that I do get something out of this movie.
I think it's a true testament to, as concept, it works. I think as a middle chapter and as a setup, and Anakin and Padme and all of that stuff falling in love and all of that, I think conceptually works. The execution is just all bad to me. I think the struggle for me watching this movie is that the effects are so terrible, especially watching them now. And I was watching them on like a better like definition television. By the way, this is something you should not watch on a good TV, because it's almost impossible. You have to watch it on like your phone or like your iPad, something that will mask how bad this looks today. It's so awkward looking. Like nothing looks real. Everything looks like an old PC game from the late 90s. And so like, if you can watch it on an iPad, it sort of hides that a little bit. So I that's my recommendation for Attack of the Clones, because there's good stuff. You have to get around a lot of really bad stuff. I think Hayden Christensen, what in the world, man? Like,
that's kind of what sinks this movie.
How did they not do another take? Just do another. You didn't nail it, Hayden. Like, you said the line really weird.
The single greatest explanation for specifically Attack of the Clones I've ever heard, and I wish I could remember who said this because I didn't come up with this, but some critic or podcaster or someone just summed it up perfectly. They said, in Attack of the Clones, it looks like Hayden Christensen is acting at gunpoint. Like George Lucas is just off camera holding a loaded gun and is forcing Hayden Christensen to act no matter how good or bad the take was. And that's what they went with, because all of that stuff with Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman is the hardest stuff to watch of this movie. And if you haven't watched it in a while, it's like 35 to 40% of it. Like, it is so much, and it takes up so much time, and there's so much just pointless dialogue that goes nowhere except a vague semblance of a angsty emotion. There's the infamous sand scene. There's also the scene where Anakin, for no particular reason, force grabs a pear from Padme, cuts the end off of it and then forces it back onto her fork. And that takes up like 45 seconds of the movie that could have been cut out,
It's
making the experience shorter. But no, they decided not to.
I think the big flaw is in that movie they prioritize him falling in love with Padme over the relationship between him and Obi-Wan. It's a big issue for all three of the prequels, and we're kind of doing a generalized thing here, is that you really need to sell the bond between these two men. But when you really break the movies down, they don't have that many scenes together. They spend the majority of these films apart. Obi-Wan and Anakin don't meet in Phantom Menace until way late in the movie. The second movie, they have like one really quick sort of chase scene together. Then they're not together again until the very end. And then part of it, like Obi-Wan's knocked out, or like, there's just a lot of like, there's just not a lot happening there. The most we get to see them interact are in like the Clone Wars TV show, which is much better about this. And then also the Revenge of the Sith, you do get to experience like this really fun, like opening set piece with them that helps, I guess.
Yes.
But Attack of the Clones does really nothing to service like what that movie needed to do with those two characters. So we've said enough. I hate this movie. I have it as number 12. Let's get to our number 11s. What's yours, Sam?
My number 11. Now I did a little bit of a cheat here, and if you object to this, I understand, and I can make a decision. My number 11 and 10, I could not decide which one I like more. They are two movies that, for different reasons, I end up feeling kind of the same about. For however competent they may be, I cannot get into them as much as I might want to, and this is going to be our first huge divergence, because the two that I just can't get on board with are Solo: A Star Wars Story and Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker.
Whoa, interesting. Okay, interesting that you're pairing them, because obviously we could say a lot about both. So you said Solo first, then Rise of Skywalker?
Yeah, that's just the order I have them written down. I have trouble deciding. I think if I was forced to right now, I would rather rewatch Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. So I guess for the purposes of this list, I will say Solo is my number 11.
Okay, so it's funny because I actually have Rise of Skywalker and Solo as my 6 and 7.
Interesting. So Skywalker is 7 then?
No, I have it in the same order as you. So I have Rise of Skywalker just barely above Solo. I clearly like it, both films, quite a bit more than you do. Yes. Will has Rise of Skywalker, get this, as his number 12.
Can't say I'm terribly surprised, but man, the holiday special, Will.
He puts the holiday special over Rise of Skywalker. I haven't talked to him about this movie yet. We haven't done the main show for Cinemaholics where we talk about Star Wars. And I haven't talked about the movie on this podcast yet. Let's talk about Solo. Solo, I have all the way at number 7. I like Solo a lot. I struggle a little bit because I don't think to me, it's probably my favorite of the prequels. Even though that's the case.
It's loose definition of prequel, but yes,
I see what you're saying. I think. Like, it's a prequel to the Han Solo story, but
I get what you're saying. I don't consider it like the prequels is the trilogy to me, so I guess I hadn't thought about it in that way.
I could see myself though really demoting it because there are things about a lot of these other films on my list. It's all sort of nebulous. Like, I could see myself bumping this all the way down to accommodate you. But what about you? With Solo, have you seen it a lot? I've seen it twice now. That's it.
I've also seen it twice. I saw it when it first came out, and then just recently when I did my big chronological rewatch of all the Star Wars movies. So have seen it twice. The first time I was not a fan either. I guess I just wasn't as I just couldn't get into it. And I really tried. From the moment it started, the second time I'm like, all right, I'm really going to give this one a chance. I'm just going to try to meet it on its own terms. And I can't get into it. I just find it very flat and unengaging, not in service of anything. Like, I don't see, with one brief exception, which is maybe like the one thing I can really point to as being like a positive thing with this movie that I can get on board with. I just don't see what this adds. Like, by the time I got chronologically to A New Hope, I had forgotten that this movie existed. Like, I don't think this sheds light on anything. I don't really think it adds to anything. And even just as a self-contained movie, I just don't find it very fun. But I also can just as reasonably see someone watching this and having a good time. So I have no ill will towards it. It's just dramatically not my favorite. So that's kind of where I stand. I could go into more specific details, but that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I guess for me, Solo is just it's the kind of movie where I agree it doesn't add much. The story arc for Han, where they get him to, is kind of familiar. We've seen movies do this a lot. It's like, why doesn't he trust anyone? Well, here's why. Here's why he has a little bit of an edge. Here's what got him here.
Yeah.
Big issue with it is that it kind of sets up more movies that we know are not going to happen. Yeah, that's not great. I think Amelia Clarke in this is just very weirdly placed, and the Darth Maul cameo at the end. Yikes.
Yeah,
it just
remember that?
Quite, yeah, it works as a teaser, but not as like a teaser for a show.
Yeah.
Like not a movie. So it doesn't
it's
feel
a twist
like
that doesn't like add anything to the movie that you just watched.
Right.
It adds to movies that are theoretically going to exist in the future, but for now it's just this confusing wrench that they've thrown into the whole thing that just makes it all feel like kind of a joke. But I do think the one thing that I do kind of admire a little bit about this movie is sort of the love story between it with Emilia Clarke, Kira is her name, and Han Solo. Just for exactly what you said, it shows us in a very elegant way, minus the whole kerfuffle at the end with Darth Maul, in a very elegant way why Han just has trust issues and stuff like that. So I'm like, okay, that was an idea, that was something they had, but really this feels like a very straightforward movie that had no business being straightforward. And that's no coincidence, because as you might remember, Phil Lord and Chris Miller were originally attached to direct this movie. And then
it was going to be funnier, it was going to be a little bit more off kilter, but then they got fired because the Kathleen Kennedy and them, they just didn't like the direction it was going in creatively, which is to say it was probably going to be really risky and aversive. Instead, or subversive, we sort of got the Ron Howard version. He was brought on to direct. I gotta say though, I didn't get it in my positives, even though it is pretty straightforward. I do think this movie is like all fun. I think every set piece of it just really works. I think Woody Harrelson as the mentor character is just gangbusters. The whole relationship between those two, I think like the heist on the train, there's so many fun ideas that are in play. I think that like the Liberation droid is really memorable, voiced by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I think Lando, played by Donald Glover, is just brilliant, and his cape is magnificent. This is like the opposite of Attack of the Clones, where the concept isn't that interesting, but the execution I think just really works. Like it's just I think they did the best with like a really studio, noted script that doesn't do a lot. Like I think the Chewbacca reveal is kind of, well, it's fine. It's kind of what you would expect.
That's kind of one of the most frustrating parts. And then shortly after that really contrived bit of dialogue where it's like, what's your name? Chewbacca. Well, we need a shorter name than that. I'll come up with something. Wink. And then that's just kind of it.
There's a lot of that in this movie.
They had to explain that Chewie was a thing. Yeah, like Chewbacca Smith or something. Like I wouldn't even know.
And they, of course, have the now infamous, well, what's your last name, Han?
Yes.
I don't have a last name. Oh, so you're Solo?
Cut to like Solo? The CSI guitar riff or whatever.
Yeah, it never bothered me quite as much. It's distracting. It does sort of stick out. But I know some people, like, at this point in the movie, they really hate it, like, with a passion. That's not me. I just kind of like, that's dumb.
Yeah, I don't hate it with a passion. I just think it's dumb and never grabs me. And I'm like, you know what? I can't reward that in good conscience. There are stuff, most of the stuff in it is not terrible. The amalgamation of it all just amounts to nothing to me. So that's why I have it so low.
I may have to adjust my rankings because I've made a little bit of a lot. I think I'm going to move this and the movie right below it down a few pegs. I'm going to have to do that. I already said what my number 11 was. That is Clone Wars.
That's right.
So, and I forgot to say Solo on Will Ashton's list. He has it as number 6. So he has the highest 6 out of all of us.
Really?
Yeah. We talked about it last year, and yeah, I mean, I think he's a fan as well to some degree. I think he just enjoys, like, I think the same thing as me is like the set pieces are pretty fun, and it's a pretty rewatchable movie. All right, Sam, what is your number 10?
Number 10, I already sort of revealed it. It was the tie
That's right.
with Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker.
All right, and I already revealed, or I guess I didn't reveal this. Rise of Skywalker is at number 6 for me. I am a fan of Rise of Skywalker. I think there's a lot of good stuff in this movie. I think Will having it as his number, oh, did I say what he has it as?
It was number 12.
Number 12. I think that's a little silly. There are things in Rise of Skywalker I heavily disagree with. I'm not going to spoil anything here. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, don't worry. But there are things they do in Rise. Like, I literally rolled my eyes and I was like, you're going to do this? And the big major complaint for this movie, which I agree with, is that it takes the subversion and the really interesting avant-garde ideas of The Last Jedi, slides them away because they decided, let's just give people what they want, not something they don't know that they want. And I think that's just sad. It's a very sad turn of events. But I don't really care because The Last Jedi is such a good film by my estimation. The follow-up can't undo really what's great about it. And I just I've seen it twice, and the second time I just let myself sink into what does work in this movie. And there's a lot. Like there's a lot in here because J.J. Abrams knows spectacle. It could be a lot better. It also could be way worse. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I really wanted to be pleasantly surprised by this movie, but as we got closer and closer to the release date, I just started to realize that I just wasn't excited for it. Like as I mentioned at the top of this episode, and I won't dwell on this too much, but just Star Wars has come to a point where it's kind of impossible just to watch them as like fun space movies that sort of grew out of this like Flash Gordon riff that George Lucas was interested in back in the 70s. It's grown a lot. It's become a lot of different things, as we've already illustrated just in the first half of this list. And the fact that this one is kind of being billed as like the great big ending to it all. This is the one that's gonna wrap it all up and make it awesome. And maybe that was just like, and it's not that it made my expectations too high, because they actually weren't. They were actually rather low. And that I still came out just not caring about anything that happened, not caring for any of the creative decisions, any of the character arcs or lack thereof that were completed and started and then evidently completed again over the course of this movie. And of course, all the backtracking that took place in comparison with The Last Jedi. It just doesn't feel like they were interested in making a movie here. They were interested in selling a product. I know that at their essence, all movies are products. Film is a business, after all, more than any other art form. So I can sympathize with them on the temptation to try to be safe as they possibly could while still making something of relative value. Couldn't get into it. And I end up coming down on the same place that I do with Solo, which is that I'm more or less completely unaffected by this movie. And I think that's a real shame, because knowing that this is kind of going to be the last one for at least a couple of years. I don't know if they have a release date
Probably
out for
more. I think they're going to be waiting a while, at least probably 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. But it's going to be the last one for a while. And in the grand scheme of things, that's not a long time. But that they're sort of going out on this as their big, like, hurrah, we did it. I'm like, what did you do, though? I mean, you made a couple of good movies, but this just kind of feels like they just put all their cards on the table and were like, this is all we got. I know we wanted it to be better, but this was all it could be. It just doesn't make me happy at all to think about it. And I could point to individual problems, of course, as anyone could, but it just makes this whole new trilogy kind of like, when viewing it all as a grand thing, just feel like kind of a sham. Like, what did you have an idea for this?
I have to agree with that. It does feel like, no, they didn't have a plan. They just didn't.
Exactly. Yeah. As much as they want to say like, no, this was all planned from the start, this was all going to work out. This is clearly the product of just maybe miscommunication, maybe, changing their minds at the last minute. It could be anything. But what resulted was this big mishmash of a movie that is trying to be so many things and ends up being nothing of note, in my opinion. So that's where I end on it.
J.J. Abrams, he's well known for just not being good at finishing things. He's good at setting things up. And that's why it was a great idea to have him be the guy behind The Force Awakens. Let Rian Johnson come in with The Last Jedi as let's really amp things up in the middle chapter. And the idea of Colin Trevorrow doing the third one, he was originally supposed to do this movie, at the time made sense because he had done Jurassic World. He had proved
Yeah.
himself as someone who could come in and sort of like reinvent an existing franchise. But apparently, what he wanted to do with it was really weird. And after Book of Henry and
Yeah.
some cold feet
Yeah.
from Star Wars, as they've sort of had to right the starship, as it were, to sort of get this stuff back on track, we have JJ finishing it out, which I think to what you were saying about films being safe, I think Rise of Skywalker, it's like 80% safe. But I do think there is a 20% there that is subversive in its own ways. And I think that what the film gets right includes Rey and Kylo are still the duo, the sort of like the will they, won't they, could they, should
You think
they.
so?
I think all of that is still really compelling. And
Yeah.
I think the excitement of seeing the main cast together on an adventure is still thrilling and exciting, and it's blockbuster cinema. Is the story convoluted and full of MacGuffins that lead to other MacGuffins? 100%. It's pretty shabby and it's pretty uninteresting when you break down the plot. But as it guides you along, I think it's still a really pulpy big screen romp in the way that the first Star Wars was. And so I really can't knock it down a lot, because I don't think there's that much that's atrociously bad. I think there are two things in this movie that are extremely unfortunate, and they make me really sad and disappointed. They involve two different sort of twists that one of them is revealed in the trailer, that a character from the original trilogy, a villain, makes a bit of a comeback here. And then there's some reveals having to do with that villain. All of that stuff blended together, I just think is quite terrible.
Yeah.
I think that it's just, it's so misguided in its storytelling. And I think that it's so against what would have been something that could have been really fascinating to end this trilogy on. And
Yeah.
it's more of a sequel to Force Awakens than it is Last Jedi. And all of that is a clear and obvious problem. I'm going to be really curious. What is it going to be like to watch Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and Rise of Skywalker all together?
That's what I'm fascinated by. Well, because I did that functionally. Because I watched them all chronologically. So those were the last three I watched over the course of like a couple days. It was strange, I gotta say. It was kind of like, in Thor Ragnarok, how like the first 30 minutes of that movie is largely devoted to just Taika Waititi kind of undoing all of the loose ends that were left from Thor the Dark World that no one cared about, but they had to deal with because it was like huge stuff. It's kind of like that for a whole movie. And then it's also trying to get to the good stuff. But lo and behold, the good stuff isn't that good. And the whole thing just feels really simplistic when really it was looking like it was going to be something really complex and interesting and, maybe even somewhat relevant. But at the end of the day, it's too messy for me to consider it just a fun romp through space. It's too devoid of personality at the end of the day. And I just didn't have a good time. So
I'm sorry.
Who knows? We're of two different minds in this one. So
Yeah.
I am glad you liked it though. I don't want to. There's enough hostility around this, so I would hate to add to that. Anyway.
I totally get it. I totally understand. You can sense this conflict and confusion, and it is one of those things where it for me it's been hard to evaluate this movie and separate what I know to be true and just sort of like the generic entertainment I do get out of it. And it is generic. And there's something about it. My last word on this before we move on is that I think the Disney Skywalker movies, not really Solo or Rogue One, I've noticed, and not really Mandalorian, the new series. I would say these two movies, Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker, under J.J. Abrams, have had, to kind of what you were saying, really simplistic messages, and if you want to call them visions of what the Star Wars universe is, that I just find very shallow the more and more I'm removed from, especially Force Awakens. It's this sort of like worldview and mentality J.J. Abrams has about Star Wars that's like one part nostalgia, the other part like something really theme park about the Star Wars universe, where it's less about myth now and it's more about this universe is a roller coaster that you get to go on with your family.
Certainly a lot of fan service. I think the difference is that J.J. Abrams is a fan of Star Wars in like the big gold capital letters with the title scroll and the fanfare, knows why it's awesome. Rian Johnson understands why it's kind of not. And I think that's the huge difference. And it's why it feels like such a mismatched trilogy in many ways.
I have to agree wholeheartedly. All right, let's go to my number 10.
Yes,
which
let's do it.
is Rogue One.
Okay, that is my number 9, so we can talk about it now.
Oh, we're similar. Okay. Will has it the highest out of us. He has it as number 8. Rogue One,
Okay.
a Star Wars story. This was the first of the spin-offs that we got in the Disney era.
That's
so
right.
This one stars Felicity Jones, and it's like a Dirty Dozen war movie from Gareth Edwards. He had just done Godzilla, and this is like the most like war-ish movie out of the Star Wars movies. And I think the simplest way I can put it is the big problem with this movie is that you don't care about the characters. The characters are just...
Besides that, it's a perfectly serviceable like men and women on a mission movie that's simple and has a stated goal, and it rides it through to the end.
Yeah. I think the third act is better than the first two.
Yep.
I think Ben Mendelsohn is a great Star Wars villain. Perfect casting. I really like him in this. I think that
fair enough.
Forrest Whitaker, this whole Saw Gerrera thing, there's a lot of weird stuff with all of that. I think the Jedha stuff, not a fan. Donnie Yen, big fan. That whole concept is so interesting. It sort of undercuts everything around it. His whole story, to the point where I was really like, man, that's a movie right there. Like, I don't understand. I think the whole Jyn Erso plot, the rebellion sort of like presented as this ideal, that's more of that intertextuality. You only like it because you know the other movies, which is why I struggle when people are like, oh, what order should I watch this in? Oh, maybe I should watch Rogue One before A New Hope. If you've never seen the Star Wars movies before, that doesn't make sense. Because out of context, this is a very bizarre thing where all of a sudden Darth Vader comes out and he gets his scene. He gets the scene people like because it's Darth Vader murdering. And
yes, it's the evil Nazi overlord of the galaxy murdering the good people, trying to fight for hope again. And they're all getting slaughtered and everyone's cheering. Isn't that kind of weird?
It's bizarre. It is bizarre how Darth Vader has been redeemed by pop culture as fun, cool Darth Vader, like that your dad dresses up for as Halloween. Dude did all the war crimes. Dude murdered kids. It's kind of weird.
Murdered kids on camera. And not even just in Revenge of the Sith. It was in, by the time Attack of the Clones happens, Anakin had already slaughtered all of those sand people. And like, granted that they kidnapped his mother, but he killed the children in cold blood. Even though we don't see it on camera, it did happen. He was already too far gone. It's just so strange the way we've kind of not so much idolized, but just become attracted to Darth Vader. And yes, Darth Vader is a great villain character, but this is something else, and I think it's kind of unseemly. So I'm glad that we're on the same page about it.
Attack of the Clones kind of like tries to mind control trick us with the whole like, well, the Tusken Raiders, they're mindless monsters. But I don't know if that holds moisture. But yeah, Rogue One, the craft of the movie is good. I think all of the Disney era films have been well made. They look impressive. They're visually appealing. I think this one is interesting in the way that as a war movie, it's a little bit grittier and moodier, and the vintage details they have to sort of match the late 70s New Hope era is pretty impressive. I think it kind of takes you back there and it strikes a good balance. Only issues are whenever they try to put in the real bleak CGI, like with Tarkin and with that weird mind flaying creature, that stuff is very goofy and with
and don't forget CGI Carrie Fisher at the very end.
Yes, that one I give a pass because it's
really
quick.
That's the one you give a pass to?
I do.
That
actually.
One is almost worse than Tarkin for me.
Well, it's quick and it's short and sweet. The Tarkin thing, they dwell on it, and I think the mind flaying thing is kind of pointless. Whereas like the Carrie Fisher one, it's just, I don't know. It's hard for me not to well up a little bit and sort of understand that that's something that like you can just recast Tarkin, right? I mean, not in the sense that wasn't a great performance, but in the sense that you could just like rewrite it so a different character is in there, so you avoid having to CGI him. Leia is just you can't do that with Leia. So I think ending with her is fitting, and especially as that was like, in the aftermath of what happened with Carrie Fisher. And I think that stuff for me personally was effective.
I can see that. I think it's just the effects are so bad that it's distracting, and I can't connect to it on that level. But it is what it is. The thing with Rogue One is that there's no reason that it can't just be an engaging, interesting, uh, just sort of let's go out and do this thing or die trying, which they end up doing. There's no reason why it can't just be a good adventure movie, except they were so focused on the plot and making sure that it very carefully synced up with Star Wars, the 1977 movie, that it saps away all the energy from what should be exciting about it and focus and dwells on the stuff that makes it dull, like all the bureaucracy with who's in charge of the Death Star and what's going on with Darth Vader and where do we have to go and what do we have to do. And then by the time the ending happens, it's this great big gigantic battle on this planet with like stuff's going on in space and down on land in various places, like inside of buildings and out on the beaches and stuff. There's the big AT-AT walkers attacking and everything. It has not done the work to make that exciting. And so I'm just sort of waiting for it to end at that point. So this is another one that I can't get on board with, even though I'm more tolerant of it the more I think about it, but I really have no desire to go back to it anytime soon.
I know some people really like it. Like they like it more than
Yeah.
you and I do for sure. Apparently, I just barely like it more than you. That it sounds like we're pretty similar on it for the
Yeah.
most part. And I don't know. I've never really truly understood why this movie is so appealing to people. I think because we always hear a lot of like, yeah, I want to know more about the other side of Star Wars, like the soldier, the smuggler, and like, let's not make it about a Jedi. And like I get that. It's just we hear it so much, and I'm like, but then when we do get stuff like that, like we get the Mandalorian, people still complain. Like,
Yeah.
it's just people's taste in Star Wars, I think, is very strange. And
Isn't it?
I think when you like center all of this stuff around like Rebels and like a basic war movie, you do lose kind of what makes Star Wars so appealing. And it's like the mythology and like the philosophy and the stuff about it that is more grandiose and operatic and meaningful.
Yeah.
That's a big ingredient into what makes Star Wars interesting. And I think it works really well. Like I keep mentioning the Mandalorian, but mainly because that's such a good balance of it. Cause it does have some of that stuff. It doesn't just dwell and pretend that like the Force isn't a major theme of these movies. And I think that's what people want. I think they want like a Star Wars movie without the Force. And I'm sorry, like that's not gonna, like the Force is so important. It's so instrumental to like this universe and it makes it interesting. The bloodline stuff I think you can do away with. Like we've seen that work really well when that's downplayed. Yeah, I don't know. Like just seeing a shoot 'em up sci-fi in space that happens to be Star Wars is a harder sell for me. So I have Rogue One as 10. You have it as number 9. So again, my number 9, or I shouldn't say again, I changed it. I cheated.
Okay.
I moved Solo: A Star Wars Story to number 9. So now,
John. Very
that's what I did.
interesting. Okay. So that means we're on to your
talked me
number
down.
8 then.
We are at number 8. What is yours?
You want to know my number 8 first?
I'm
Okay, we
ready.
already talked about it. It's Attack of the
I
Clones.
knew it. I already wrote it down. Like I literally am looking at it right now. I put it down as your number 8. I just knew it. Ugh,
Okay.
so high.
So tell me yours then.
Okay, my number 8 is Phantom Menace.
Okay.
And Phantom Menace, I do think I think I think the big change here is that like I've decided after I rewatched it a couple days ago, I do like it better than Solo and Rogue One. I'm a big champion of this movie to the point where I think the problems that get lobbed at it are still there. You still have to suffer through those Jar Jar scenes. You do. I just don't think I don't think they're as egregiously annoying as they are. It's just fun to hate on this movie. I think as like an adventure story with like the hero's journey and like collecting friends and like Qui-Gon Jinn's death and the battle with Darth Maul and how Anakin sort of is brought up, all that stuff I think is really fascinating. And I think this movie moves. I think of all the prequels, even though I don't think it's the best one, I do think that it's the most structurally sound. Like I just felt like I was following these characters to full fruition. I know all the stuff about the taxes tends to get on people's grind, they're just like, man, like this conflict doesn't make sense and all this stuff. I get that. It's a lot of mumbo jumbo to sort of justify why would this like trade federation be able to occupy Naboo and get away with it? And how come they can't prove it with holograms that this is happening. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird how it's all conceived, but it does serve a storytelling purpose that I do think is profound. And that is the idea that it's setting up that the Jedi are basically useless. The Senate
Yeah.
can't seem to function without bureaucrats. And this is what paves the way for a strongman dictator to begin his slow ascent to power. I think of all of the prequels, it's probably got the least amount of like intertextuality. It's got a bunch of it, but I think
the C-3PO
Anakin
stuff is especially frustrating.
I think that stuff, yeah, for sure. But I think it's more elegant when it comes to R2D2 and
Okay.
why he's able to fit here. And then also, I would say with Anakin, I think he's an interesting enough character without
Yeah.
even you knowing he's going to be Darth Vader someday. I think he's a big Mary Sue for sure, or Gary Sue. Like
Gary Sue.
He's so great
That's
at
funny.
everything. He can fix his speeder. He can do all this stuff. He has all the midichlorians. That's another thing we have to
And blow
address.
you up. Boom.
But as a Gary Sue, he's at least a compelling one. And when you do know about the Darth Vader stuff, it is sort of essential to all that stuff working. I think Luke is a better realized protagonist for that reason. Like he
For
has
sure.
more apparent flaws, whereas all of Anakin's flaws are kind of his connections and attachments, his age, and his conflict of like, I have all this potential. What do I do with it? And then all of this loss with Qui-Gon. So I don't know. Phantom Menace, I think, really works as a prequel movie. So I have it as my number 8. It's kind of like middle of the road Star Wars for me.
Yeah, I have it at number 7. I also like it better than Rogue One and Solo and Attack of the Clones, of course. I just kind of don't like this one. But I do recognize there is certainly a lot of interesting stuff going on in here. I think specifically one thing that I realized last year was actually quite a rather interesting decision was that making Anakin a childhood slave. It really sort of implants that idea that, oh, Anakin sort of has to what's the word I'm looking for? Has to serve to feel fulfilled, maybe subconsciously, but it totally explains like why he would be in such a vulnerable position to be seduced by Darth Sidious, so to speak, and by the dark side. It like just coming from this place, just this hardship, it really sets up that character good. I think just the problem that I take with this movie and the reason why I can't really say that I'm a huge defender of it is because I just don't find it engaging in the moment. I think it's more interesting to think about than it is to watch, with some scenes accepted. Again, the Darth Maul stuff is great. A lot of the visuals are just really imaginative, regardless of how good the visual effects are. And I do take a little joy in precious few Jar Jar moments, if only ironically. But I think the stuff at the end with the battle droids where Jar Jar is somehow defeating them all without even trying, I can't help but chuckle a little
It's
bit.
such a cool set piece too, with like the concept of the Gungans and the way they fight being so different. What you were saying, it's so imaginative. Much better in the visual effects department than the second movie because it actually has some practical effects. But I wouldn't say it's the most visually successful of the prequels compared to Revenge of the Sith. Just me personally.
I don't have too much more on Phantom Menace. I fall on the negative side, but it's not a passionate negative side. So this is one that I can see myself going back to in the future, just to sort of try to get at the meat of it a little more, because I know it's in there somewhere. It's just so hard to find.
I've had to watch it a lot to like get to this place where I'm at peace with it, I guess. If that makes any sense. Because I went on a journey, right? Where like I didn't really like this movie much as a kid. I didn't watch it that much and I thought it was kind of boring. But then I started to like it a little bit more when Revenge of the Sith was coming out and I was rediscovering them. It still wasn't anywhere near my favorite. But then I just really started to like resent it. And then I've kind of come back around more in like my late 20s and been like, there's stuff in here that's quite salvageable. But Will has it pretty low. He has it as his number 10. Yeah, so he puts it above Holiday Special, Rise of Skywalker and Attack of the Clones.
I would be very curious to hear Will discuss the redeeming factors of the Clone Wars movie, if indeed there are any. For all we know, Will doesn't like that one either. But I'm curious why it made it above some others.
He has Clone Wars as number 9, so he prefers Clone Wars over this one. Also, Rogue One. That is my number 8. We already said your number 8 was Attack of the Clones, so your number 7. What is that?
We just talked about it. Number 7 is Phantom Menace for me.
Yeah, that's right. You said that. So okay, 7 is Phantom Menace. That brings us to our number 6.
Your 7 was Solo, but you moved that to number 9. So that means you have a new number 7, right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. So your 7 was Phantom Menace, just to be clear, making sure I have that right. Now, my 7 is, get this, Revenge of the Sith.
Okay.
Yeah, here we are. So Revenge of the Sith, where's that on your list?
That's my number 5. I actually really dig Revenge of the Sith.
Interesting. Sister. Okay. I like Revenge of the Sith. Literally just watched it. It's goofy. It's weird. It's a hard...
I don't even think that's fair.
You don't think it's weird or goofy?
No, I really don't. I think it's a very effective, albeit with some strange moments. I just don't think goofy is the right word, but I think it's a very effective, dramatic, and just downright tragic story that really kind of grabs me from moment one. And there are flaws all throughout, don't get me wrong, but by the time I get to the end, I'm like, yeah, I just saw a movie and it was like good. So I am definitely will fight for Revenge of the Sith any day of the week.
Yeah, I'm not a hater of Revenge of the Sith. And I just think the goofiness it's still got some of that prequel goofiness that, R2-D2 setting droids on fire with fuel.
Yes.
And Obi-Wan Kenobi just sort of dropping into like the middle of all of these battle droids and just
that's cool.
Well, he just sort of assumes they're not just going to shoot him, which doesn't make any sense to me. He's right. There's just a lot of weird decisions made here that are just very odd. There's a lot of odd decisions and things that don't really make sense. The way Padme dies, the way that they just decide to hide Luke. They hide him with his real family, and like they don't really hide him. And
they're sort of rushing to wrap up a lot of stuff just in time for A New Hope at the end. I will grant you that.
I think there's a lot of really weird, just the things that Yoda says in this movie are very strange. It's not as bad as like C-3PO doing puns and Geonosis, but it is a little bit of like, not if anything to say about it, I have, where you're like, is this really Yoda? Something I really appreciate about The Last Jedi is it kind of gets us back on track with like what made Yoda appealing, and that was how surprising he would be. Whereas like in the prequels, he's this odd, lion-hearted protector instead of the person who's really challenging. And it's like the advice that he gives Anakin is so bland and generic, and of course he turned to the dark side. Yoda is just they wave it away, I guess, with the whole like the dark side has clouded their vision. And again, it's that whole thing I was saying before, is like just the Jedi dumb, and I think Anakin's dumb. I think everyone's dumb in this movie. Padme is stupid, plain stupid, where she's like, I don't believe you that this stuff you have on tape is real. And like the whole thing with like Anakin, just, I've got to kill Jedi because they tried to kill and killing's wrong. And none of that stuff holds up logically at all. So I have weird issues with Revenge of the Sith because it's just, but it is endearingly awkward, I guess.
Interesting word choice. I'm endearingly awkward. Okay.
You're like, weird. Someone said that to me just the other day.
Yes, just today. I was described that way.
I think the action works. I think that of all the lightsaber duels, Obi-Wan and Anakin is clearly the most like emotional, raw, and interesting. And its conclusion is pretty, like you were saying, just tragic. And I think the battle between the Emperor and Yoda is incredible. Like it's just an excellent set piece. I think Order 66 is heartbreaking.
That is the saddest scene in Star Wars history. I don't care what anyone says. It is so intense. Like, and it is such a foregone conclusion. It makes it all the worse. So I think that's why I connect with this movie so much. See, you're looking at it logically, and you're right to do so, because there's a lot of stuff that can be instantly picked apart and be pointed to as inconsistent. Fair enough. When I watched this movie, I sort of I'm sort of more forgiving about that because just because of the effectiveness of it all. I think I love watching this as just sort of the nail in the coffin of how all of this is destined to fail, and we're all destined to just succumb to our worst inclinations, and in such a way that whether we want it to or not will hurt the others around us. That is a hard thing to watch someone go through, and so much pathos to it that was just not in any of the other two prequels. I'm like, whoa, where did this come from? I'm constantly surprised by just how effective this is. It helps that the effects had advanced, and that I think the actors had sort of come to an understanding with their characters. They're like, okay, this is the one we were really getting to. This is the one where all the stuff hits the fan.
Yeah.
And
now for
the
the
thing I
main
love
event.
about this movie, and it sounds obvious when I say it, but I just love how pointedly not happy the ending is. It ends with characters dying and turning evil and giving up all hope, when in the back of our heads we know that everything will turn out all right. It is a real masterclass in prequel filmmaking. I think it really, really works, for a variety of reasons. Even on just an individual scene level, I think it has a lot of the greatest lightsaber fights, as you mentioned, a lot of the greatest just big, huge action shots. Like I think of the fight between Obi-Wan and General Grievous. There's that, but there's also all that other stuff going on in the background with the clone armies fighting off against just hordes and hordes of droids, and the space battle at the beginning. I will literally just put that scene on, that huge like 2-minute tracking shot, just getting us into this world of war. I love that that's how the opening crawl starts. Just like,
Yeah.
this is all we got. War, exclamation point. And yeah, that's kind of it. I really feel like this is amounting to something, and like this is really exploring these characters that we've sort of been tediously building up over the previous two movies, and now it's letting them all let it out and conclude their arcs, so to speak, even if it's just for this sort of isolated trilogy. So yeah, I have don't have like any huge problems with Revenge of the Sith, besides some of the acting still doesn't quite hold up. But by the time I get to the end, I'm so into it that I don't even care. Like, you watch the scene where Obi-Wan says, "I have the high ground." You watch it on its own and it's funny. It's like, this dialogue is so strange. I would never say this in a battle. But in the moment when we've built up to it, and when we've followed their descent into just swinging at each other with their laser swords, trying to murder each other with all they have, and it's really intense. It's crazy to watch how this movie has aged so well. So I dig the hell out of this one.
Very bittersweet movie in terms of that ending.
Yeah.
It's definitely very moving to see Luke and Leia sort of begin, or like sort of have their epilogue that we know is coming, like you said. I think the visual effects in this one are just a little bit more even, little bit more immersive than Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. It's more successful. I think there still is awkwardness. There's still some odd CGI scenes. I think the big issue with this one is the settings, the environments. We spend a lot of time on Coruscant, which at this point we've been on Coruscant so much that we're dwelling on a location that is just so familiar. The nice thing is that Coruscant is a very fascinating place, and that there are some like really sweeping shots, and like just Anakin and Padme in silence, sort of like longing into like what's about to happen. That stuff's effective. But when we're in the sets, I mean, it's so apparent sometimes that like that green screen effect is still there. It's better than Attack of the Clones, but you still sort of just feel like you're watching these characters walking around a computer. And
really, I don't get that sense at all. I guess I'm just
I
way more
definitely
wrapped up into the story than you are. That's not even occurring to me. So maybe that's just the difference in how we envelop ourselves in the world of Revenge of the Sith.
It's weird because some scenes it's not as bad. Like Utapau never quite made me feel like outside of what's happening. A lot of it is in like the scenes where Anakin and the Chancellor are in his room, for example. And I think that the big standout scene is probably like that first hint at the seduction, where he's telling him the story of Darth Plagueis. And I think this movie does a better job of like explaining like why Anakin would turn and why he would distrust the Jedi. I think when it actually happens, it's a little less elegant, because his self-righteousness seems to be at conflict with his actions. And it's like they're trying so hard to make his decision to turn so believable that there are almost too many reasons. Like the big reason really just has to be he's distrustful of the Jedi, and Palpatine's the only person who can save Pat. But then they add in all of this other stuff. It's not just that he's distrustful of the Jedi. He feels like the Jedi were wrong all along, and like there's
and
stuff
that he can't get into their secret club of cool Jedis.
Jealousy. There's a lot of stuff going on there, and it's like, I don't know. Not all of it is as graceful, but yeah, I totally agree that when Revenge of the Sith works, it's better Star Wars than at that point we had gotten in quite a while. So I have it as 7. You have it as number 5. We're not too far off. And then Will has it as his number 7.
Not on the same page as Will, as it turns out.
So Phantom Menace was your 7. What's your new number 6? Have you said it yet?
Not my new number 6, just my number 6 all along was The Force Awakens, episode 7.
The Force Awakens. I have this one as my number 5. So very similar. Okay. And Will has Force Awakens as his number 14. No, I'm just kidding. He has it as his number 4.
That's not even possible. Number 4, you said?
Number 4, yeah. So higher than the two of us. So he has it slightly higher than me. I have it slightly higher than you. How did you decide to put this one over Phantom Menace?
Well, it's a better movie, plain and simple. I think it's just more well made. The characters are more well defined. I do take issue a little bit with what you said earlier with the 2 Abrams movies being kind of simplistic. Rise of Skywalker, I agree, is simplistic, but I think there's actually a lot of nuance to this movie that kind of gets overlooked, especially in retrospect, and that is sort of the way it kind of reckons with what Star Wars has become. We were talking earlier about Darth Vader and how there's sort of this glorification that's emerged over the years that's a little strange considering the evil, insidious origins of the character. And I like that this movie decides to take the angle of making the villain devotedly worship at the altar of Darth Vader, even going so far as to like have his own clone army of stormtroopers and have a similar looking helmet and a red lightsaber and engage in the forces of the dark side. Just try to eliminate all that stand in his way. It's really fascinating to see that, especially as it connects with real life. We're seeing that a lot, how there are sort of these outdated belief systems that are really being held on to, even though everyone can kind of agree that, yeah, that's not really a thing anymore. It's not the greatest, like most elegant story ever, but I do think there is something there. And I like how the hero is, at the time, we believe to just be someone just with a good heart. And that is, of course, all the protagonists of the movie. There's Rey, there's Poe Dameron, there's Finn, the stormtrooper who just can't bring himself to do evil. I think there's a lot of nuance to the characters of this movie and how it's all about just trying to push forward and build a better future for ourselves. This would be expanded upon in Last Jedi, but even here in sort of its infant stage, while also trying to construct a thrilling narrative and let us know what's been going on the past 30 or so years in the Star Wars galaxy. I think it's really elegant. I take issue with some of the pacing. I think it goes a little too fast and a little too what's the word I'm looking for? A little too slapdash. Like there's not a lot of time to sort of react to everything that's going on in a way that can really get me invested by the end. Like the whole Starkiller base thing is really kind of a non-entity in the story at large. Like I'm not really interested in that. But at the end of the day, I can forgive that in light of the really interesting angles it takes narratively with the Star Wars universe as a whole. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. But clearly, we're both fans of this one. So tell me about it, John.
Force Awakens, yeah. I think it's the return to form for Star Wars. Yeah. It really is. It's bringing it back to its roots, and it's doing a lot of really complicated and difficult things. It's reintroducing Star Wars under the Disney umbrella. It's bringing people back to this universe, but with some new avatars, with some new toys to buy. And with a whole new story, it needs to justify its existence. I think it was inevitable that Force Awakens was going to have to reawaken a lot of skeletons from the past, and the Darth Vader shroud would have to loom over. I think this movie does a few very bold, brave things. Luke doesn't show up until the very end. Leia isn't a character who really gets a lot of screen time yet. She's sort of saved for later. I think that was pretty bold. No Lando, no, like, I think they focus in on Han Solo. They let this be the Han Solo movie. And I think that was always a great conceit. This was the Han Solo one. The next one's the Luke one. The third one's the Leia one. Sadly, that didn't turn out to be the way that they had originally planned it. And that is a huge shame. But Force Awakens does its job well. It sets things up. It gets us reinvested into Star Wars. It has a new, more focused attention on practical effects, on a world that doesn't feel like you're in a computer. Like, you feel like you're there. And you feel like, even though this plot and a lot of these worlds are less imaginative than the prequel movies, like, they just really are. Like, this isn't George Lucas, so you don't have that same sort of like, man, that's Star Wars right there.
Yeah.
Like, we
have Jakku. What is it? Just another desert.
Yeah, it's just kind of Tatooine with a backstory, honestly, that doesn't even really get fully addressed. The idea of like scavenging all the ships and everything is sort of added in, but yeah, that doesn't quite compete with like the immense layered thought outedness of Tatooine, which has so many compelling elements to it. And it's been said to death, but yeah, just a lot of the narrative is recycling of previous Star Wars films, mainly New Hope, with a lot of Empire Return sort of like slipped back in there. And I think that
doesn't bother me as much as I think about it more, but I do see the complaint.
It doesn't bother me much either, because the film's still entertaining. And I think that for a movie with such a huge checklist, I think being like the most challenging avant-garde film was never what they were going for. They were going for, it's fun to like Star Wars again. And it gets the thing that is most important right, and that is, you want to like these characters. You want to see what they're going to do next. Even the villain is very strong. I think every character here is fascinating to watch. I do think this is Rey at her least interesting compared to the other two movies.
Maybe Rise of Skywalker, but yeah, it's certainly not her shining moment.
Well, yeah, as I said before, I'm more of a fan of Rise of Skywalker. I do think she's really interesting in that movie. I think she's at her most compelling in Last Jedi. And this one, there's a lot to her that just doesn't quite add up. And I think that JJ is focusing too much on the mystery behind her and not just letting her be just a character who's in this world, because they just keep having to remind us that, like, who might her parents be? And she's got to get back to Jakku. I do think there's a lot of like rushing of her development. And not to the extent where I think it's wrong for her to be an exceptional character who's good at stuff. I think there actually is better explanation for her than Luke on like why she's so competent. It's like, she's a survivalist, she's a scavenger, she understands this world. It's a very unique skill set she has that has allowed her to become who she is. But I think when it comes to the Force, the fact that she doesn't struggle as much into it, it's at once very suspicious, which is why all of the theorizing happened. But then on the other, it's like, well, it'd be nice to just see this character reckon with what the Force is, because so much of her character in this movie is like running away from it, but then not running away from it, but then really quickly grabbing onto it without understanding it, and then making the decision that she loves the Force. Now she wants to be a Jedi, without the film really showing us into like, why would she want to be a Jedi? And I think that's a flaw that carries over from Phantom Menace too, because in that one and New Hope, it's like the sort of decision to go on the adventure is something that happens really quickly. For Luke, the motivation is like, what else is he going to do? And also he thinks the princess is cute. For Anakin, it's like he just wants to be free, I guess. And with Rey, I don't know. I still don't know why she wants to be a Jedi, just because she could use some Force powers right now. I'm not sure.
It's an interesting point. I think it's just the thrill of it all is what I can kind of connect to, in that how there's that scene where it's after they take off from the planet. It's after they had that run-in with Kanja Club in space, and they arrive on that planet where the not Mos Eisley Cantina is. and Rey looks out of the window of the Millennium Falcon and says, "Wow, I've never seen so much green." I think that's kind of what's at the heart of it, is just that desire to see more of the world than we ever knew existed, and to experience and understand more of who we are than we ever knew we could. So I think I can connect to it on that level, but I can also see that it might seem kind of perfunctory and just obligatory. It is a plot point that exists at the first stage of all the trilogies, so I hadn't considered that. But yeah, it is. It's not the easiest thing, as it turns out.
Well, we're both fans of Force Awakens. Definitely,
Yep.
I'm more on the positive side. I think that it's such a blast of a movie. It's better than Solo for sure in that sense, where you can really just get sucked into it. I think looking at the trilogy as a whole, it really did do well to sort of sell these characters. And I think even though where it leads may not be as satisfying for everyone, I do still think that as a first chapter, people can get a lot out of it. So that was Force Awakens. I had it as my number 5. You have it as your number 6.
Yep.
And then as we go into our number 5, that's Revenge of the... You had Revenge of the Sith as your number 5. My 5's Force Awakens again. And then number 4 is next.
Yes.
What's your number 4?
My number 4 is Episode 4, the OG, just Star Wars, as I like to call it.
I have Star Wars as my number 2. So we're getting into the end game.
My goodness. And what about our old pal William? Where was Star Wars on Will's
Will
list?
Ashton also has it as his number 2. Synergy. I think it looks like the only film that he has out of that we haven't mentioned yet that's like numerically below where we're at. He has something at number 5 that has not been brought up. So we'll get to that soon.
Okay.
All right. OG Star Wars, otherwise known as New Hope, the movie that started it all. How did you decide on it as your number 4?
It's one of the best for a reason. It is this is the one that more than any other Star Wars movie is just such a fun adventure through space, and such an interesting new world just blossoming before our eyes. And especially when you consider that like nothing like this had ever been done before, it is really impressive, and it still holds up wonderfully. I think there's simplicity might sound too derogatory, but that is kind of what it is. That's kind of the reason it holds it back. Just a tad bit is it's kind of cut and dry by the end, although it does leave it open for a sequel. So that is the reason that I don't consider it to reach the heights of my top 3. But make no mistake, this is one of the classics, and for a reason. It is totally efficient and just a really great time. I have no issue with Star Wars Episode 4.
I really don't either. It's just so well done, especially when you look into what they had in terms of their resources and how well this casting paid off. And I think the genius of where these characters show up in the story. Yes, the first 15 minutes are complicated to get through. I think they for viewers especially, like, it's interesting how George Lucas is really trusting people to let this movie suck them in. But once you are in, and I think especially once they introduce Han Solo, of like, okay, here's your character, here's the one who's more like you. Yeah. And once that happens, I think, man, that this movie just sings and it goes. I really appreciate how the ending is so, like the final battle sequence, it really just ties everything together. Luke's commitment to trusting the Force. It's an actual like war scene, which is really deserved here. Even all of these set pieces have elements that are interesting to like war, with like sneaking into the Death Star is like a very stealth mission. And Mos Eisley Cantina is sort of like surveillance and reconnaissance. And, you know, there's like some, like, we got to get away from the bad guys kind of scenes. And it's just so efficient. It's such a lean running time. And I mean, it's one that started it all. It's hard for me to consider it worse than a lot of Star Wars films. That is for sure. Although it was hard. It was hard between this and my number 3. They were almost interchangeable. To the extent where the only reason I have it higher is because of all the Star Wars films. This one is probably the most challenging for its time. At this point, it's not quite, because it sort of defined what's sort of accessible and mainstream. But in its time, it was so bold and out there. So it's it's one of the very best. That's Star Wars. It's so fun to rewatch, and I'll be watching it pretty soon, like I always do. I usually watch this movie at least once a year,
For
and
sure.
I always get something new out of it. There's always something I
Yeah.
noticed I think I know this movie inside and out, and I don't. It's hard to because there's
Yeah.
just so much detail in it. So
So much detail, so much imagination, and yet it is not a second longer than it needs to be.
Right.
I'm always amazed by how the final battle starts. I'm like, oh my gosh, already. I was having so much fun, but then I'm like, yes, we get to see it all end, and it's so efficient in a way that none of the others are, and in a way that none of the others have to be. To be fair, but I am very thankful for that. That I just like that this movie exists. I really do.
All right, that was your number 4. My number 4 is Return of the Jedi.
Okay.
Yes, Return of the Jedi. Where do you have it?
I have that one at number 3, so not too far beyond.
Interesting. Okay, I know some people who don't like Return of the Jedi. They don't think it's a good
Yeah.
movie, and I can respect their weird opinion. It's a good movie. Return of the Jedi has some of the best scenes in all of Star Wars. That's
It
always
does.
been my big point. First of all, not Jedi. Luke becoming a full-fledged Jedi at the very beginning of this movie is so satisfying.
Yeah.
He's not perfect. He's not a god level Jedi or anything like that. He's
No, not yet.
Not quite. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that like he still relies on his friends though.
Yeah.
And this adventure at the very beginning to rescue Han is just pulpy excellence. It's just so incredible. We're back on Tatooine, and we are with like the big bad Jabba who's been alluded to. Boba Fett's in the mix.
Ooh.
And every character
Ooh.
has a chance to shine. Leia
Yes.
Leia gets to be there's some unfortunateness there.
Yeah, a little.
Yeah, a little bit there. But her scene with Han makes up for it in a bit. And I think even the droids get to do fun things here. Lando gets to have a lot of real fun. And then, I think that once we get into the Ewok stuff and the Endor, the movie loses a little bit of steam.
You think so?
I do. I think it's what holds this movie back from being as good as the very best of Star Wars, in my opinion. And it's a big reason why I put the first Star Wars above it. But it does nail the landing. I think once we get to Luke and Vader and the Emperor, all of that stuff is just, that is Star Wars right there. Like that is just all of that. It's pitch perfect.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. It's I take so much joy in just seeing all the different places we get to go, how it still manages to be fresh and exciting after 3 movies. Imagine that. Like, we haven't run out of stuff yet. And one thing that I loved, especially with this recent rewatch, is a revelation I had, which is that at some point in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Lando Calrissian had to apply to be a guard at Jabba's palace. And I really want to see that scene of Lando going in like, I'd really like to be a guard here at this palace. Don't worry, I don't have any affiliation with the Republic, or just something like that. Like, that had to have happened somewhere along the way. That just brings me so much joy. But just besides that, the fact that we just get to spend so much time in this scummy den of villainy with every creature puppet they could possibly find, just sort of mingling around in the background, and how we have all the little side characters. One of my favorites is, of course, Salacious B. Crumb, which I love that character has a middle initial more than anything. And I would love to know what the B stands for. It's probably like Bartholomew or something. There's so much imagination to this movie. In weirdly enough, I would just talked all this, glory about episode 4, how that has so much imagination. I find this one to be way more exciting with the stuff it comes up with. I think there's one scene in particular which kind of defines why I prefer this over 4, which is when it's after Luke arrives, says, "You will bring Captain Solo and the Wookiee to me," and C-3PO is like, "No, Master Luke, you are standing on," and then falls into the pit with the Rancor monster in it, defeats the Rancor, and then there's just this shot, the Rancor handler coming into like the cave where the Rancor was, seeing its lifeless form crushed under the gate, and then just just crying. And it's like, that is imagination right there. That is an entire character that I got in the span of like 10 seconds. And that is the kind of stuff I don't get out of A New Hope. For as efficient and exciting as that one is, there's portent and extempore to Return of the Jedi that I can't help but love, and I love every bit of it. Even by the time we get to Endor, I'm like, ooh, now we're on this planet with a bunch of bloodthirsty, murdering, psychotic teddy bears. That's the thing that no one addresses. Like these things were about to burn them alive and eat them, and it's only because a golden robot Jesus told them not to that they didn't. Like that is such a fascinating thing that's in this movie. And of course, there's just so many memorable lines and set pieces. And by the time we get to the end, it really feels like everything is on the line. Yeah, they just recycled the big evil Death Star from the original, but why not? It almost worked. Like I can forgive that much. And so by the time there's like the ground battle going down by the shield generator on Endor, the space battle with Lando attacking the Death Star, and then the conflict between the Emperor and Darth Vader and Luke, it's all going on at the same time, and it's edited so well. I dig the hell out of it. I love Return of the Jedi. I think I get so much more. I find it to be so much more complex in how it sort of wraps up the story than the fun and exciting yet rather simplistic space adventure that episode 4 was. So that's kind of where I land on Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, it's a good film. I think that the things that are good in it have a lot to do with just Luke in general. I think that Leia and Han and Lando, outside of that first set piece, they do kind of fall to the wayside a bit. I think there are a couple of things that happen on Endor that are exciting, but then once we get into like the final battle, their whole thing where they have to fight and take over the shield generator, it all just sort of feels like this is the side story. It's like, oh look, Chewbacca is taking over in ATST. That's cool. Even Lando.
You're not wrong. I just find it exciting.
Even Lando, like doing the space battle with the person you don't really know and the Falcon. Like,
you mean Neen Nub?
Sure.
You better believe I know that character's name.
Even that is just a little bit like, okay, cool. Can we get back to Luke and Darth Vader? Like, that's thanks. Because that stuff is what I find more interesting in this movie. And especially once we get to the very end and like Darth Vader, that's that whole sequence where he finally redeems himself, I guess, is pretty fascinating. Although a lot should be said about how Return of the Jedi looks once you see all the prequels. The idea of him becoming a Force ghost, little suspect how that worked out.
Especially that it's in the form of Anakin like 25 years earlier. That's very strange, and I wish they hadn't replaced that original actor with Hayden Christensen. I also wish that they wouldn't have added that weird music number in Jabba's palace. Oh, that's very distracting.
I was going to mention that, yeah, Jedi Rocks or whatever it's called. That is weird.
The Max Rebo band, John.
We haven't talked a lot about how the original trilogy has been tampered with a lot. A lot of CGI has been added to it, and a lot of it's bad. A lot of it is just added without rhyme or reason. It's mainly New Hope, but there's a bunch of it in Return of the Jedi in particular, and I'm not a fan. I think that I'll take the puppets and animatronics over that stuff any day. Return of the Jedi, and Will Ashton had this as his number 5. So
interesting.
Will
is not a fan of this one as much as we are, I guess.
No, he likes Force Awakens and the first Star Wars more than this one. And then there are 2 last Star Wars films that we haven't talked about. Let's get into them because we are now getting into my number 3, which is The Last Jedi.
Okay.
Now, what is Last Jedi for you?
Last Jedi is my number 1.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Very fascinating. For me, my number 1, 2, and 3, which at this point it's obvious, my number 1 is Empire Strikes Back.
Yes.
That could change. That really could change. I think when it comes to Empire, the first Star Wars and Last Jedi, to me, I could almost move them around a bit. Like they're just all 3 are just that great. They're the best Star Wars films. But let's talk about The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
Certainly one of the more controversial Star Wars films. A lot of people have
You
a lot of
think?
complaints
Yeah.
about it. I think most of the complaints, for whatever reason, I either don't agree with them or they don't bother me as much as they bother other people. And I think I'm already starting to see it. I think this is that movie that is actually going to last the test of time because more
Yeah.
and more people are starting to realize, like, I think I was just being critical because it was easy at the time to be critical.
Yeah.
And when you watch a movie like Rise of Skywalker, I think people are like, man, yeah. Like Last Jedi was actually, we, we
Wasn't that bad, was it?
it really more than that. It really was great. And I
Yeah.
think that, I think especially like when you look at the parallel between this and Empire Strikes Back, it's the same story. History repeats itself. Empire Strikes Back was that movie that, like, it wasn't a big hit. It wasn't, critics didn't unanimously love it. People had a
Yeah.
lot of complaints about Empire Strikes Back. They had little petty grievances with it, but lo and behold, it's now considered the best one by a lot of people. But for
Yeah.
me, yeah, Last Jedi, I could just talk about this movie for hours, and I have. I've talked about it a lot with Will in particular on the show when we reviewed it. But I think for me, it comes down to this is the Star Wars movie that has some of my favorite moments,
Yeah.
really visually and narratively.
Of course.
Holdo maneuver, throne room, the entire Luke battle on Crate.
The entire last like 45 minutes of this movie is this nonstop emotional thrill ride in the best possible way, and not just in a shallow way that's like sort of operating on fan service. There are real personal stakes in this. It feels like the entire universe is at stake, and this is a matter of life and death, and of the ability of the universe to continue in a way that maybe we can live to see another day. It is huge, lofty stuff in a way that I don't get out of any other Star Wars movie. And I really like, I don't want to say this, I don't want to mean this in like a condescending way, but I just feel bad for anyone who can't watch this and see the same thing that I see and just be so distracted by these flaws that they're picking up on, that they can't get into the real intensity of it all and the real pathos of it all, and how it feels like this is the end times. Like, it feels like this could be the last movie, and that would kind of be it. Like, the way it resolves is almost a conclusion unto itself. How we have lived another day, and sometimes that's all you can do, and sometimes that is all you need. And I get so much out of that. Even the second best Star Wars movie by my estimation, which, as you've assumed by now, is Empire. I love that movie to death, but there is nothing that like that profound to me that I find in Empire compared to this. So
That's a good point.
I cannot get enough of it.
Last Jedi has ideas. It has the most ideas and thought-provoking ideas that outside of Empire, because Empire, I think what sets that one apart is the Yoda stuff and this sort of recontextualizing of like, okay, here's what the Jedi are. And then Last Jedi is more of like, here's what the Jedi aren't. Here's what they don't live up to. And and it even introduces all of these ideas of like, well, here are the downsides of the Resistance and the Rebellion. I think like people really like to down that Canto Bight scene, but I think it's actually really crucial because it's all sort of leading up to this reveal of like, yeah, it's kind of all for nothing, because when you really look at it, like the Resistance is being dealt to by like all of these players who, like, all of these problems you're feeling right now, all of these injustices and all of that Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker stuff I was talking about, like this really like intangible, like Star Wars theme parkness, all of that stuff, like all of that, like, isn't it great to be part of Resistance stuff? There's people outside of this who aren't thinking about that, who don't care about that, and they're perpetuating the system and you don't even notice. That's in a Star Wars movie?
Yeah.
It's just crazy to me. Like, this movie, you pick it out and it's a treasure trove of thought-provoking things that don't usually make their way into sci-fi movies. I didn't get a chance to say this is Will's number 3. So same as me. He and I have the exact same top 3. We need to spend less time together, I guess. But I'll repeat what I said before. I think that Last Jedi stands a real chance of just growing in estimation for me because of just how it works on basically every single level. I think that it introduces force powers that are so fascinating to me. The
Yeah.
force connection between Rey and Kylo is first introduced here. I think it's just beautiful. I just think it's like, I love when a force power takes you off guard.
And like and the whole epic finale where we realize that
Yeah.
Luke can project himself across the galaxy. And I love how it pays off the line earlier in the movie where he says, "What do you want me to do? Walk out with a laser sword and face down the entire First Order?" And it turns out he literally does that, and it's the most badass thing
But
in
it's such
Star
a
Wars history.
subversion. Yeah,
Yeah,
but it's like that he's using his head. He's not just using his, he's not thinking with his saber, if you know what I mean.
yeah, there you go.
But yeah,
And I like how it sort of goes back to some of the original influences of the Star Wars, the whole Star Wars mythos, and that how that scene, that end scene on Crate, I believe is the planet's name, is very reminiscent of like just this huge desert that you might see like a gunfight in a Western, or like maybe a samurai battle. And if you know anything about samurai fights, it's that whoever draws their sword first almost always loses. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened at the very end of this movie. A lot of people kind of take issue with the whole arc that Rose and Finn go through, how it looks like Finn is about to sacrifice himself, taking down the very forces that had him oppressed in The Force Awakens, and was about to put everything on the line to save the friends that he had come to along the way. And then Rose saves him at the last second and says, "No, that's not what we need to be doing here." And that just grows on me more and more over time.
yeah.
I used to think it was kind of frustrating that it is how we're not going to get anywhere by just lashing out
or just by killing ourselves.
By killing ourselves and attempting to maybe take down someone else with us.
Yeah.
Like that is just so dramatically not what we need to do. And I love too how we have the character arc with Poe in this movie. It's not really said outright in text, but it seems like after Force Awakens, he's sort of kind of developed a head of steam, thinking like, "Oh, hey, I can do this. I can be a leader," and thinks that he knows all the right moves to make. And it turns out that no, you need to have patience. You can't just be rash and rush out and jump in an X-wing and blow stuff up, as in Princess Leia's words, or General Leia, excuse me. I think that's a really good message.
Be royalty.
Yes, always and forever. I think that's a really, really good message, especially for Star Wars fans. That's one of the things I love about this movie, is that J.J. Abrams understands why Star Wars is awesome, and Rian Johnson understands why it's not, and takes that and runs with it to like almost every possible place that he could think of. I think I would be amazed to find out if there was like whole subplots that got cut out from this movie. It's a very long movie, but I never lose interest for a second.
Yeah, I'm with it the whole way through. And if I would add to something you said, I think that to Abrams, Star Wars, he's more concerned with what Star Wars was. Johnson's more interested in what it could be.
Exactly.
And that's more, that to me is a better basis for a movie. That to me is like, this movie, this is why it should exist and this is why it's important, as opposed to here's a movie with explosions and spectacle that you're gonna watch and you're gonna eat some popcorn and you're gonna walk out of the theater and move about your daily life. Whereas like Last Jedi is a movie where you're like, it actually like changes something and actually like lasts and goes with you.
It moves me to tears on multiple occasions. It moves me to laughter quite often. There's a lot of really funny parts to this.
Very funny.
And I'm just completely wrapped up in it the whole way. I love how everyone gets a chance to shine. Even Captain Phasma, who everyone complains is like gets completely the short shrift by this trilogy. That's only true if you expected her to be a huge character. They never wanted to go with that, and it's obvious watching the movies. But I digress. There's so much to love about this, and I'm glad that we are on the same page, because this would be a very difficult list if we weren't.
Yeah. There's only, now that I've seen Rise of Skywalker, there's only a couple of things that, not flaws, but things that I feel left wanting more. I want more insight into how and why Kylo turned. And this movie does the Rashomon thing, which is a unique and effective way to get this across of like what happened between him and Kylo. But there's some surrounding context that maybe a little of that would be useful in like fleshing this out further, I think. Like what was going on with Ben, we should say, with Ben Solo, and you know what really was in his headspace and his struggle and his turn, and why was he so receptive to, as we kind of now know, like what he was receptive to. I think though the Snoke stuff in hindsight works really well. The idea to push him to becoming the new big bad, that to me was when I knew I was in good hands, where I was like, yeah, this is a movie that's going there and you don't know where it's going next. And the fact that we don't get this big climactic showdown between Rey and Kylo. Now, that's the next movie. You end it with Rey reuniting with her friends, and it doesn't end with just a laser battle. It ends with Luke outsmarting and sacrificing and saying goodbye.
The older generation showing the younger generation that there is a better way. Even though it may come at a cost, it's worth seeking out. And I think that is something that I do not get out of any other blockbuster movie. Like this might be, I know this is a hugely bold statement and I'm going way out of proportion here, but this is like one of the best blockbuster, just one of the best things that big event cinema has had to offer in as long as I can remember, which granted isn't as long as a lot of others, but regardless, this is top-notch stuff. It is one of my favorite movies of the decade, quite honestly.
Fantastic. I don't blame you. We could go through all of it. There's so much to pick out and appreciate here. I think the return of Yoda is great.
Yeah.
Just one of my favorite scenes of the whole film. And the ending. The ending on that shot of a kid and the reveal that, you know what, like the Force can choose anyone. It's that Ratatouille. It's like, you know, like not everyone can be a Jedi, but a great Jedi can come from anywhere.
But a great Jedi can come from anywhere.
Much more so than my criticism designating it. So, yeah. So that's Last Jedi. It's just such a gem of a film, and it makes me a little sad. The idea that maybe Rian Johnson might not make his own trilogy, but man, can you imagine if Rian Johnson got 3 movies all to himself? We would be very lucky indeed. And I think history has been pretty kind to the people who have allowed Last Jedi to sort of like, who felt free and unabashed and liking the movie. And even though I know people have valid reasons for disliking it, and that's totally valid and fine, and like I don't think you have to love this film by any means. I do think that anyone who gets on your case about liking it or thinks that it's wrong to like this, I think what they really want is they want consensus. They want everybody to hate something or like something because it makes them feel better about a decision they've made, because they feel like you're attacking them for not agreeing with them. And if we can get away from all of that, I think like that's tying into the message of the movie itself, of like finding common ground, not focusing so much on what we have separate or what we don't have in common, but then focusing on what we do. And I think that is our better way, I guess.
It's ironic, isn't it, that the message of this movie didn't reach the people that needed it the most. It's kind of a shame, but you know what? It's the ones who got it are better off for it, I think. And
I want to maintain, this is the last thing I'll say, Last Jedi take, Luke tossing the lightsaber behind him is perfect. It's brilliant.
Yes.
I think people who complain about that, disillusioned Luke Skywalker not caring about a lightsaber surprising and weird to you and offensive? Why? It fits his character.
Because he didn't grab the lightsaber and ignite it and say, "Where is he?" Like, I don't know what they wanted.
I don't get that. People are like, the lightsaber, he would respect the lightsaber. I was like, well, not this version of Luke. Like, he's written differently and it's more interesting. And it's like, don't you want to see where that goes? Like, I think he didn't respect his old lightsaber. He tossed it aside and refused to use it to battle the Emperor. So it's
Very strange. Very strange.
Very strange indeed. But that is The Last Jedi. What are you going to do? I had it as number 3. You had it as number 1. But there's one last film that I had in my number 1. And I'm assuming you have it your number 2. And that is
That's right.
Empire Strikes Back.
And strike back it does.
It does. This is the first Star Wars movie I saw that really, because I watched the first Star Wars kind of, just sort of subconsciously, but Empire was the first one that I really like watched and understood and got into. Man, Empire is it's such a foundational film. I think it deserves all the credit it gets because the scenes with Luke and Yoda and there's a reason they've gone down as like some of the most quotable lines of all time.
Yeah.
Do or do not, there is no try.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And everything going on with like Luke and Darth Vader and that twist. I mean, we're just talking about cinema changing right before our eyes. Like it's such a relic and a milestone, an extra milestone, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it really is. It really is because Empire Strikes Back just changed blockbusters. It changed, or I shouldn't say changed blockbusters because blockbusters were still coming about, but it sort of defined franchise filmmaking, mainly for the better. You could say for the worse because we've gotten terrible franchises since then. But what this film was able to do with its unique storytelling and the way that it darkened the Star Wars universe is like chapter 2 is the dark one. That is something that kind of revolutionized films and TV. A lot of people say it's like, oh, well, it's no Empire Strikes Back. And what they're referring to is the way that Empire just improves upon everything and doubles down on what you like, but then also presents a lot of what you don't know you like already. I just think this film is basically perfect. Like I don't think I could change a thing about it. I think the only thing that it kind of is weird by modernize is the way that Han and Leia kind of, how Han negs her a bit. And like the connection between them is a little bit rushed. There was something about it that maybe is a bit missing of like, he's so confident in the attraction. Like,
well, and there's like a missing part of the story that we never got to see. Like, I forget what the line of dialogue is, but it's like, oh, you should have seen her in the cave of Yakety Yak or whatever it's called.
Like how that's your go-to every time. It's like Yakety Yak.
Did I say that already? I've been saying
something
that a
to
lot.
that effect. I still though, I think the romance of it is good in the sense that it carries things along. It gets you invested, makes you wonder about the love triangle. It's exciting. It's thrilling. Ooh la la.
And you know what I love is how it has to sort of come to a conclusion when Han gets frozen, like, and there's nothing they can do about it. They realize that there are more important things in that moment. Like, that's what I love, how it's not this huge declaration of love and how the movie goes on for a long time after that. And it's at that point when they realize, like, you know what, we've lost. We need to get out of this with as much as we can get. The Empire struck back and they won. And that is kind of the thing that I love the most about this movie is just how similar to Revenge of the Sith, but just so much more effective, how it has an unhappy ending for all intents and purposes. It's like, okay, it's a tie now. There is more to this story than you ever would have assumed just from watching A New Hope. Yeah.
When it ends, you're sort of left with, all right, everyone lost. The characters have failed. But you sort of look out and you see Luke and Leia together again, and you're like, they still have each other. They can still come back from this. Yeah, if you were going to judge this film just by its quality, I think that it's one of the most imaginative of them. I think Cloud City, Dagobah, Hoth, the asteroid belt. I mean, all of these locations are just so wonderfully realized. I think that entire, like, we're on the Falcon and, like the way that romance kind of bubbles up in that tension, that's where it really works. The Hoth
and
stuff.
then C-3PO's never one to give up on like a third wheel situation, which I love.
Yes, this is probably my favorite use of C-3PO, although Revenge of the Sith is kind of nice because they downplay him a little bit. Probably for the best. Even more so than Phantom Menace to an extent.
Yeah. It's not my favorite 3PO moment. That is in Last Jedi when it's just like, Master Luke, and then wink, walks out. That is, I love that moment so much.
I guess I'm the other one. Not a lot of people appreciate how C-3PO is like, I bet you're curious about my red arm.
Yeah, whatever happened with that?
They explained it in one of the books. That is the kind of like shamelessness of Force Awakens. Like, And if you want to find out that story, which is for another time, don't forget to
Yeah.
download this thing or buy this book. And then, that's
Well,
the dizziness of it all.
well, there's in Lego Star Wars: The Force Awakens, released in 2016. There was an entire level dedicated to that, where it turns out
Glad you noticed.
C-3PO and BB-8, I think, and a bunch of other droids who are actually like First Order droids wound up together on a ship and crash landed on a planet. And then this one droid sacrificed shelter or something to save C-3PO, and who had somehow lost an arm along the way, and then it rained acid on like the First Order droid and it rusted and turned red, and C-3PO cannibalized that droid's arm and took it. And that's kind of that game's version of what happened, and it's really dark, and I don't know if that has anything to do with what they've actually established.
I
as
have no
canon.
idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, at least in this one, you get to see C-3PO get like almost destroyed.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny. Yeah, the Luke training stuff, the reveal who Yoda is, the reveal of Obi-Wan as a Force ghost, the reveal of the AT-ATs. This is a movie with so many reveals, and it all comes up to the biggest one of them all, one of the greatest twists of all time. The reveal that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. And that's where just the whole thing changes and comes into its own. It comes into like the Star Wars epic, the mythology. All of it is in that moment. So that's why it's my number one. I can't imagine putting anything else above it, at least right now, because it's the most culturally relevant of the Star Wars movies. It's what really made this thing more than just like a passing fad. That I think was like when in the late 70s, like everyone went to go see Star Wars. It really was like a trend. It was something fashionable. But Empire is what cemented this into pop culture at large and what made it something really meaningful and something that to be taken seriously. So it's my number one. It
was certainly the first Star Wars movie to take just sort of the pulpy adventure of the first one and like completely flesh it out into something more, and that's what the best Star Wars movies have done, and this is certainly one of the best. I will not fight anyone arguing that.
All right, with that, we have Empire number one for my list and for Will's list. So how are we going to finish this out, Sam? How do we rank this?
We've got to figure that out. Well, it doesn't help that we have a different number of movies on each of our lists.
That
but
is true.
I think it would be easiest to go from one, aka the best, all the way down to the worst of them.
Sure.
And this is just between the two of our lists, correct? Or should we attempt to somehow average out Will's list into it?
I feel like we should use Will's list as a gut check, something to help stem the tide of what gets picked and what doesn't. For example, we have to pick what our number one is. Is it Last Jedi or is it Empire?
I think as much as I want it to be Last Jedi, because it's my number one, the fact that it is both of y'all's number one and is my number two, it's not easy to go wrong with putting Empire at number one. So that is a sacrifice I will make for probably everyone's sake, to be perfectly honest.
Well, if we put it at number one, then I think it's only fair for your number one to be number two. So go above the first Star Wars. I think that's fair. So
I think so too.
So Empire Strikes Back number one, The Last Jedi at number two, Star Wars, the OG is right now at number three, but you have it at number four. I had it at number two. So it's between Star Wars and Return of the Jedi. How do we decide this?
That's the $1 million question.
Will has Return of the Jedi all the way down at number five.
I feel like the sentiment around Return of the Jedi is generally more in line with yours and Will's ranking of it. So it's a shot in the dark. But if you'd like, I will allow episode 4 to just edge out Return of the Jedi.
Interesting. Okay, so if we do that, if we have Star Wars at number 3, Return of the Jedi at number 4, then our number 5 is between Revenge of the Sith and The Force Awakens.
Yes.
You were the one who had Revenge of the Sith higher.
Yes.
Right? So do you want to maintain that? Because you have a little bit of cred, you've compromised a bit.
I have.
I'll leave it to you. Do you want Revenge of the Sith to remain at number 5 or The Force Awakens?
I'm very passionate about Revenge of the Sith getting a good spot on this list. And as much as I do dig Force Awakens, I don't think it quite reaches the heights of Revenge of the Sith. It reaches heights of its own, but that one I legitimately will stand by as being pretty darn good. So I think if you're leaving it up to me, and you might regret this, John, I think I will take you up on that offer. I think I'm going to put Revenge of the Sith at number 5, followed by Force Awakens at number 6.
Done. Okay, we have Revenge of the Sith at number 5, Force Awakens at number 6. I like it. It's interesting. Then at number 7, things are getting interesting. You had
this is where it gets very fascinating.
Well, I should say too, my number 6 was The Rise of Skywalker. That's a tough one because you and Will have Rise of Skywalker quite low. So I wouldn't feel comfortable letting it being pretty high because you guys obviously aren't as big fans.
Yeah.
So we have, let's see, at number 7, you have Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
I had Revenge of the Sith. I don't have any other ones here. So really, it's probably this. I think this is where Phantom Menace goes.
It's kind of the only one that makes sense, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know what else we would put there. So Phantom Menace. Next we have. I still have Rise of Skywalker. I'm kind of looking at that right now. Now the films you have above it are Attack of the Clones and Rogue One.
That's right.
Attack of the Clones. I don't want anywhere near this area of the list. No.
Yeah.
I'm
Fair
not.
enough.
I don't want it.
I'm not going to die on the hill of Attack of the Clones, so you express all the distaste you want.
Well, I have Rogue One at 10. If I concede Rogue One here at number 8, would you concede Rise of Skywalker at 9?
Yes, I think that's fair.
Okay, it is happening. I'm putting Rise of Skywalker. I put Rise of Skywalking in the document at number 9. Solo at number 10. Or sorry, not Solo. Rogue One at number 10.
Wait a second. Rogue One. I thought that Rogue One was number 8.
Rogue One's 8. You're right.
Yeah.
I was doing it backwards there. So Rogue One is number 8. I feel kind of iffy about that. I much prefer Rise of Skywalker, but part of doing the list.
Yeah.
Rise of Skywalker at 9, and then at 10. The only one you have left here, you have Attack of the Clones, and you have Solo.
Yeah.
For me, I just have Solo. So if we were to split the difference, it would make sense for Solo to come next, I think. Because we both have it higher.
Yes, by just a little bit. Yes, so that would mean that Solo would be number 10, followed by Attack of the Clones at number 11.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
The concede for me there is that Attack of the Clones wouldn't be like Clone Wars would be below Attack of the Clones, which I can concede, I guess. I'm not that upset about that. So Attack of the Clones at 11. Clone Wars at number 12, and then Holiday Special at 13. Oh wait, I forgot about the Ewok ones.
Yeah, don't forget the Ewok movies. Which Clone Wars and Ewoks: A Battle for Endor. It is such a marginal difference. It's practically negligible to me. So I see no reason not to put that at number 13, followed immediately by the first Ewok movie at 14.
It is totally up to you because I'm not weighing in on the Ewoks one, so you can put them wherever you want.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So
you know what? Screw it. I want to. Let's not give Clone Wars more effort, more credit than it deserves. Let's maintain my bottom 4 here. So that would mean that Attack of the Clones number 11, Ewoks: The Battle for Endor number 12, Clone Wars number 13, Caravan of Courage at number 14, and dead last at a whopping number 15 is the one, the only Star Wars Holiday Special. Sorry, Will.
So yeah, let's compare this to Will's list. So same number 1, Empire. He has Star Wars at 2. We have it at 3.
Yeah.
He has Last Jedi at 3. We have it at 2. He has Force Awakens at 4. We have it farther down at 6. Same deal. We have Revenge of the Sith at 5. He has Revenge of the Sith all the way down to 7.
Will, not as big a fan of the revenges or returns of Jedi and Sith as we are.
It's close, yeah, because he has Return of the Jedi at 5. We have it at 4, so it's similar. Force Awakens, we have at 6. He has Force Awakens at 4. Phantom Menace, we have 7. He has it at 10. He has it pretty low. Rogue One, we have at 8. he has at 8. So that's the one that's another one that's similar or the same.
Neat.
We have Rise of Skywalker at 9. He has it at 12.
Yeah.
A bit farther down. Solo at 10 for us. He has Solo higher at 6, much higher.
Very strange.
Attack of the Clones is our 11. That's his 13, so getting closer. And then he doesn't have Ewoks Battle for Endor, but our Clone Wars is 13. He has it a bit higher. He has it at number 9.
I have to know what Will sees in that movie.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah.
Because he has Clone Wars above Phantom Menace and Rise of Skywalker and Attack of the Clones.
Yes.
His holiday special is above Rise of Skywalker. I know we've said it before, but I still don't get.
I don't get it either. Yeah.
Because he has Attack of the Clones dead last. So anyway, that's our list. Let's go through it one last time. Number 15.
Let's do it. And let's alternate, shall we?
Sure. I'll start.
Yes.
15, the holiday special.
Damn right. 14, Caravan of Courage, an Ewok adventure.
Oh boy. 13, Clone Wars.
12, Ewoks, the battle for Endor.
11, Attack of the Clones.
10, Solo.
A Star Wars story. You forgot that part.
No, I apologize.
9, The Rise of Skywalker.
8, Rogue One.
7, The Phantom Menace.
6, The Force Awakens.
5, Revenge of the Sith, or Three's Company.
Yeah, it's good one. 4, Star Wars, aka A New Hope.
We have Return of the Jedi at 4.
I apologize. I was reading my old list. 4,
Retconning.
Return of the Jedi.
3, just Star Wars. You can call it New Hope if you feel like it.
Number 2, number 1 in my book, Star Wars: The Last Jedi.
And number 1, the reigning champ since 1980, and that would be The Empire Strikes Back. That'll do it.
Does it ever?
That is our definitive Cinemaholics ranking of every Star Wars movie we felt like including.
Yes.
Thank you for listening. It's been an extra long episode or bonus show. Was fun the entire time, Sam.
Absolutely.
But we'll see you back for the main show. And Sam, I think we'll see you maybe for an episode coming up that we'll give away.
Maybe, yes, maybe more than one. Who knows?
Who knows, indeed. All right, that'll do it for us. We'll see you all next week in a galaxy far, far away from...
That's correct.
The internet, California. I'm John Agroni.
And from the internet, Colorado, I'm Sam Noland.
And we both have a bad feeling about this list. See you next time.